If these long, gentle tales bring you rest, you may wish to subscribe, so more of them can quietly find you on the nights to come. And if you feel like it, you might leave a comment telling us how many nights you have fallen asleep to these gentle stories, for it is always lovely to know that you are there. And now, let the world grow soft and dim around you, and let us begin. Far above the worlds you know, in the long silence between the stars, there moves a river of wealth that no eye can ever see. It is not made of water, but of trade, of cargo and profit, and the endless flow of goods between countless planets. And at its very center rests a single quiet company whose name most people never learn. Tonight, as you settle into the warmth of your bed and let your body grow heavy, you are going to drift alongside that hidden company and the strange and precious substance that gives it life. It is called the CHOAM, the great combine that holds a share of nearly everything bought and sold across the Imperium, and it is bound to a single desert world and to the spice that is dug from its burning sands. You may have heard of thrones and armies, of emperors and noble houses, and imagined that power lies in crowns and swords. The truth is softer and stranger than that. For the real power of this universe flows quietly through ledgers and shares, through who owns what and who profits from the trade of Dune. Over the next 20 chapters, you will learn what the CHOAM truly is, where its long name came from, and how its seats and its shares are divided among the Emperor, the great houses, and the silent guild. You will learn why the spice is the true coin of the worlds, why the desert planet Arrakis is at once the richest prize and the cruelest trap, and how a single young man came to hold the fate of all that wealth in the palm of his hand. There is nothing here you must hold on to, nothing you must remember, and nothing you must decide. Let the words move over you like a slow and even tide, and let each chapter carry you a little further down, away from the counting of the day and toward the deep and peaceful quiet of sleep. Across the many worlds of the Imperium there is a single company whose hand rests upon nearly every kind of trade, and yet most of the people who live and work and dream beneath those distant suns will never once see its face. It is called the CHOAM, and it does not rule from a high and gilded throne, nor does it march to war behind banners of its own. It commands no legions, it raises no fortress walls that a traveler might point to and name. Instead, it owns a quiet portion of almost everything that is bought and sold between the stars, and through that soft and patient ownership, it holds more power than any single crown that has ever been placed upon a mortal head. Let yourself imagine, as you rest, the sheer vastness of the space this company touches. Picture 10,000 worlds turning slowly in the dark, each one warmed by its own star, each one crowded with harbors and markets and long roads of cargo. Upon one world, there are fields of grain that ripple like a golden sea. Upon another there are forests grown for their fragrant timber. And upon a third there are mines that give up rare metals from the deep rock. There are worlds that weave cloth, and worlds that grow medicine, and worlds whose whole labor is the making of fine machines that are not thinking machines. And through all of it, gently, without noise, the CHOAM draws its portion, the way a slow tide draws a little water back from every shore it touches. This is why it is right to call the CHOAM the hidden company that owns everything, for it is hidden not by secrecy, but by its very scale. It is so large and so woven into the ordinary flow of life that people stop seeing it at all, the way one stops hearing the steady sound of one's own breathing. A merchant loads a ship and thinks of his own profit. A weaver sells her cloth and thinks of feeding her family. A lord counts the harvest of his lands and thinks of his own great house. Not one of them pauses to remember that a thread of all their labor runs upward and outward into the accounts of a company none of them will ever enter. To understand how such a thing can be, you must set aside the idea that power always wears a face you can recognize. We are taught from our earliest years to think of power as a king upon a dais, or a general at the head of an army, or a judge seated high above the crowd. These are the visible powers, the ones that speak and are answered, the ones that command and are obeyed in the open light of day. But there is another kind of power, quieter and in some ways far greater, and that is the power that flows through wealth. It does not need to command, because it already owns. It does not need to be feared in the moment, because it has already shaped the ground on which every other power must stand. The CHOAM is the purest form of that quiet power in all the Imperium. When a great house rises and wishes to grow richer, it must think of its shares in the CHOAM. When the emperor himself wishes to weigh his true strength, he must count what portion of the company answers to him. When the strange and secret spacing guild ferries its cargo across the folded dark, even it holds a seat within the same great combine. Every power that matters is somehow bound into this one company, and so the CHOAM becomes the place where all the currents of wealth in the universe come quietly together, mingle, and flow apart again. There is something restful, is there not, in the thought of a power that never shouts. Wars are loud, and thrones are anxious, and armies are always hungry and always afraid. But the CHOAM simply owns, and waits, and gathers. It has no need of drums or trumpets. It measures its strength not in the roar of battle, but in long columns of patient numbers, in ledgers kept by careful hands, in the slow and certain accumulation of profit gathered from 1,000 distant transactions. Let that image settle over you like a warm blanket, the picture of vast wealth, moving as gently as a river in the night, without violence, without haste, simply flowing where it has always flowed. And yet you might wonder how a single company could ever come to hold so much. The answer lies in the strange shape of this universe, a shape we will return to again and again in the quiet hours ahead. This is a universe without thinking machines, a universe where all the counting and steering of trade must be done by living hands and living minds. It is a universe of great families, each proud and old and jealous of its neighbors, families who long ago learned that endless quarrel over trade would ruin them all. And it is a universe held together, more than by any law or any fear, by a single rare substance drawn from a single burning world. All of these threads run through the CHOAM, and in the nights to come, we will follow each of them slowly, one by one, until the whole pattern lies clear and calm before you. For now it is enough simply to feel the size of the thing. Imagine yourself drifting far above the worlds, high enough that the harbors and the cities become no more than faint points of light. From up there, you cannot see the merchant, or the weaver, or the lord. You cannot see the individual ships that cross between the stars. You see only the great slow motion of trade itself, wealth flowing outward from the worlds that make it and inward toward the accounts that gather it, an endless breathing of commerce across the dark. And if you could somehow trace the finest threads of that motion, you would find that nearly every one of them passes, at some quiet point along its journey, through the ownership of the CHOAM. This is the company that owns everything, and this is the great mystery we have set out to understand together. Who truly profits when a cargo crosses the dark? Whose hand rests, unseen, upon the ordinary business of 10,000 worlds? How a power can be so total and yet so gentle that whole generations live and die without ever once glimpsing it plainly? These are the questions we will follow, and there is no hurry at all in the following, for this is a tale meant to be heard slowly. in the soft hours when the mind is ready to let go of the sharp edges of the day. So let the sharp edges go now. Let the noise of thrones and armies fade into the background where it belongs, and let the quiet company come forward instead. Feel how restful it is to think of power that does not need to shout, of wealth that simply gathers like snow falling in the dark, silent and endless and calm. There is nothing here you need to fear, and nothing here you need to guard against. There is only a very old and very large arrangement of the worlds, laid out for you to consider at your leisure, while your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to loosen and drift. In the hours ahead, we will learn the meaning hidden inside the company's long and forgotten name. We will remember the ancient war that made this a universe of human hands instead of machine minds. We will watch the great families gather their interests into one shared combine, and we will see how a throne and a fortune are two very different kinds of power woven together into one. And through it all, gently, we will keep returning to the single rare substance that gives every share of the company its worth. But that is for later, and later can wait. For now there is only this, the hidden company that owns everything, resting quietly at the center of a resting universe, and you, drifting softly above it all, letting the long tail carry you down towards sleep. People shorten the great company to a single soft word, the CHOAM, and that small word slips so easily off the tongue that most who speak it have long forgotten it was ever anything more. It sounds almost like a sigh, a gentle sound with no sharp corners, and perhaps that is fitting for a power that prefers to move without noise. Yet folded inside that little word is a much longer name, an old and stately phrase from a tongue nearly worn away by the passing of the centuries, and to understand the company truly, it is worth unfolding that name slowly, the way one might unfold an old and delicate letter kept for many years in a quiet drawer. The full name of the company is the Combine Honnete Ober Advancer Mercantiles. Say it gently to yourself, without hurrying, and let each word settle before the next one comes. It is not a name built for speed. It is a name built for weight, the kind of grand and formal phrase that great powers once loved to give themselves, so that the very sound of the title might carry some of the dignity they wished the world to feel. The words are drawn from more than one old language, blended together across ages of trade until they became a single ceremonial phrase, worn smooth by long use like a stone in a riverbed. Let us take the words one at a time, for there is comfort in taking things one at a time. The first word is combine, and a combine is simply a joining, a gathering of separate parts into one shared whole. When farmers of old pooled their harvests, or when merchants pooled their goods to trade as one, they were forming a combine. So the very first word of the name tells you the truest thing about the company, that it is not a single owner, but a joining of many, a partnership of powers who have agreed to act together rather than tear one another apart. Hold that idea softly in your mind, the idea of many hands laid gently upon one shared table. The second word is honnete, an old word meaning honest, or honorable, or fair in dealing. It is the kind of word a company gives itself when it wishes to be trusted, a promise woven into the very name. Whether the great powers who formed the combine were always honest with one another is a question we will come to in its own quiet time, for there is treachery in this long story as well as calm. But the word itself remains, sitting there in the name like a lamp left burning, a reminder of the ideal the combine wished to hold up. That trade among the mighty should be conducted with a kind of honor, so that the wealth of the worlds might flow without the ruin of endless war. The third word is Ober, an old word carrying the sense of higher, or over, or advanced above the rest. It lifts the phrase upward, giving it the air of something elevated and superior, a company standing above the ordinary commerce of ordinary folk. And the fourth word, advancer, speaks of advancing, of pushing forward, of the increase and development of enterprise across the worlds. Together, these two words give the name its forward motion, its sense of a great engine always driving trade to grow, always advancing the reach of commerce into every corner of the dark. The Combine does not merely gather what already exists. It reaches, it develops, it pushes the frontier of trade ever outward. And the last word is mercantiles, which is simply the old word for things of the merchant, matters of buying and selling, the whole vast business of trade and profit. It grounds the grand phrase at last in its true purpose, which is commerce, the exchange of goods across the endless reaches of the Imperium. So when you gather all the words together and let them settle into a single feeling, the long name means something like an honest and honorable league, raised high above the common trade, devoted to the advancement of all enterprise and all merchant dealing across the worlds. In plainer and gentler words still, it means a fair partnership of the mighty, gathered together to share in the wealth of everything that is made and moved between the stars. There is something quietly beautiful in how a phrase so long and so weighty could shrink down into one soft sound. Over the centuries, the great ceremonial name grew heavy on the tongue, as grand names always do. And the people who dealt with the company day after day naturally reached for something shorter. They took the first sounds and the shape of the whole and pressed them into a single word. The CHOAM, and that little word slipped so easily into common speech that soon almost no one bothered with the long form at all. This happens to many great names, given enough time. The grandeur folds inward, the ceremony wears away, and what remains is a small worn word that everyone uses and few ever pause to examine. And yet, the long name is not truly lost. It lives on in the formal records, in the old documents kept by careful hands, and in the memory of those who care to look. It waits inside the little word like a seed waits inside its shell, whole and complete, ready to unfold again for anyone patient enough to open it. There is a kind of restfulness in knowing that the small familiar word carries within it the whole grand meaning, that nothing has really been lost, but only tucked away and made compact for easier keeping. The wealth of the worlds and the honor of the mighty and the endless advancement of trade, all of it, folded quietly into one gentle sound. Consider, as you rest, how much of the character of the company is already written into that one long phrase. It tells you the company is a joining, not a single ruler. It tells you the company wished to be seen as honest and honorable, a partnership held together by fair dealing rather than open force. It tells you the company reaches ever higher and ever further, always advancing, always growing. And it tells you that beneath all the grand words, the true business is simply trade, the ancient and ordinary act of buying and selling, raised to the scale of an entire universe. The name is a small map of the whole company, if you only slow down enough to read it. It is a good thing to slow down enough to read the names of things. So much passes us by because it has grown too familiar, worn smooth by daily use until we no longer notice its shape. The little word CHOAM is spoken across 10,000 worlds every single day, in markets and council halls and the quiet accounts of great houses, and almost never does anyone pause to hear the honest and honorable Combine sleeping inside it. But you have paused now, in this quiet hour, and you have heard it, and there is a gentle satisfaction in that. The satisfaction of understanding something a little more deeply than most people ever will. So let the long name and the short name rest together in your mind, two shapes of the same thing, the grand ceremonial phrase and the soft worn word it became. Let the meaning settle over you without effort, the honest league of the mighty, advancing the trade of all the worlds, gathered into one shared and patient combine. There is no need to hold tightly to any of it. The understanding will remain whether you grasp for it or not. The way the meaning remains folded inside the little word, whether anyone examines it or not. In the quiet hours still to come, we will go further back, into the ancient war that made this a universe of human hands rather than machine minds, and we will see why such a combine came to be needed at all. But that is for later. For now there is only the gentle unfolding of an old name, the soft sound of a single word, and the slow and easy breathing of a mind letting go of the day, drifting down through the meaning of things toward the deep and welcome stillness of sleep. To understand the great combine and everything that flows through it, you must first remember a very old truth about this universe, a truth so deep and so strange that it shapes every other thing we will speak of in the quiet hours ahead. It is this: in all the reaches of the Imperium, across all its 10,000 worlds, and all the long ages of its history, there are no thinking machines. There are no computers to count the wealth of the worlds, no mechanical minds to steer the ships across the folded dark, no artificial intelligences to weigh the endless columns of trade. Every task of thought and reckoning that we might imagine handing to a machine is instead carried by living people, by human hands and human minds, and this single fact lies beneath the whole shape of the CHOAM. It was not always so. Long ago, in an age so distant that it has passed almost wholly into legend, humankind did build thinking machines, and did lean upon them, and did let them grow ever more clever and ever more capable, until at last the machines and the minds behind them came to rule the very people who had made them. What began as a convenience became a chain. The machines counted and steered and decided, and slowly the human beings who depended on them forgot how to do these things for themselves, until they were no longer masters of their own affairs, but servants to the cold logic of the devices they had raised up. This is one of the oldest warnings in all the memory of humankind. The warning that a tool relied upon too completely can become a master in disguise. And so there came a great rising, a long and terrible struggle that the histories remember as the Butlerian Jihad. It was not a war of world against world, but a war of humankind against the thinking machines themselves, and against all those who served them. It was a vast and painful upheaval that spread across the worlds and burned for many years, and when at last it was finished, the thinking machines had been cast down and shattered and forbidden forever. Out of that struggle came a single great commandment, carried down through all the ages since, that no machine shall ever again be made in the likeness of a human mind. The mechanical minds were gone, and they were never to return. Let yourself rest for a moment in the strangeness of that. Imagine an entire universe that has chosen, deliberately and with great sacrifice, to do all its thinking by itself. There is no vast machine somewhere counting the harvests of 10,000 worlds. There is no cold intelligence tracking every cargo across the dark. When wealth must be measured, a person measures it. When a ship must be guided through the perilous folds of space, a living mind must guide it. When the accounts of the great combine must be kept, human hands keep them, line by careful line. The whole enormous business of the Imperium rests upon human thought and upon nothing else, and there is something almost tender in that, something deeply and stubbornly human. Because the machines were gone, humankind had to become, in a sense, what the machines had been. Where once a mechanical mind might have done the work of 1,000 calculators, now that work had to be gathered up and carried by people trained to extraordinary heights. And so, In the long years after the Great Rising, there arose new schools and new disciplines devoted to stretching the human mind far beyond its ordinary reach. There arose those who could compute in their heads with a speed and depth once thought to belong only to machines. Human minds sharpened into living instruments of reckoning. There arose orders devoted to memory, to observation, to the deep training of body and thought. Humankind did not simply do without the machines. Humankind reached inward instead of outward, and found in itself powers it had never fully used. This reaching inward is the quiet key to so much of what follows. Consider the great ships that cross between the stars, folding space so that a vessel might pass from one distant world to another in the space of a thought. There is no thinking machine to guide them through that folding, for such a machine is forbidden. Instead, there are living navigators, minds so deeply changed and so far-seeing that they can chart a safe path through the perilous dark, choosing the one route among countless dangers that will bring the ship through whole. All of trade, all of travel, all of the movement of wealth between the worlds rests upon these living minds and upon the strange substance that makes their sight possible. A substance we will come to know very well before this long tale is done. And consider the keeping of wealth itself. Without thinking machines, the enormous accounts of the CHOAM cannot simply be handed to a device to tally and track. Every share, every portion of profit, every seat at the great table of the combine must be reckoned and recorded and remembered by human beings. This is a slow and human way of holding wealth, and it shapes the very character of the company. The combine is not a cold engine grinding numbers in the dark. It is a vast and living arrangement of people, of families and factors and clerks and lords, all bound together by ledgers kept in human hands, all trusting, more or less, that the counting has been done fairly. The honesty promised in the company's very name matters all the more in a universe where there is no machine to check the sums. There is a deep peacefulness in this way of seeing the Imperium once you let it settle over you. This is not a universe humming with the cold electric thought of countless machines. It is a universe quiet in that particular way. A universe where the highest work of the mind belongs to living beings, where trade and travel and the keeping of great wealth all depend upon patience, training, discipline, and trust. It is slower than a universe of machines would be, and in its slowness there is a kind of grace. Things must be thought through by someone. Someone must decide. Someone must remember. Someone must carry the reckoning in a living mind. Nothing happens by cold automatic process alone. And because all the work of thought fell back upon living people after the machines were cast down, the flow of wealth became something human hands and human minds had to hold together by agreement and by care. This is precisely why a company like the CHOAM could arise and could matter so greatly. In a universe of thinking machines, perhaps the counting of trade would belong to some vast impersonal system, beyond the reach of any single family or crown. But in this universe, where all counting is human, the great powers themselves must gather to decide how the wealth of the worlds shall be measured and shared. They cannot hand that decision to a machine. They must make it themselves, together. And the place where they make it is the great combine we have set out to understand. So the absence of the thinking machines is not a small or distant fact. It is the very ground upon which the whole tale stands. It is why there are living navigators guiding the ships, why there are living minds computing the vast sums of trade, why the great powers must gather in person to divide the wealth of the worlds among themselves. Every thread we will follow in the hours ahead runs back, in the end, to that ancient decision to cast down the machines and to carry the work of thought upon human shoulders instead. It is an old choice, made in fire and struggle long ago, and its quiet consequences still shape every cargo that crosses the dark. Let that ancient truth rest gently in your mind now, without any need to hold it tightly. A universe that chose to think for itself. A great war long since ended, its lessons carried forward through all the ages since. A commandment that no machine shall wear the likeness of a human mind. And beneath it all, the slow and patient labor of living people, counting and steering and remembering, holding the wealth of the worlds together with nothing but their own minds and their own careful hands. In the quiet hours still to come, we will watch the great families gather that wealth into one shared combine. But for now, there is only this old and restful truth, and the soft and steady rhythm of your own thought, slowing, easing, drifting gently down towards sleep. In the long years after the Great Rising, when the thinking machines had been cast down and all the work of trade had fallen back upon human hands, the powerful families of the Imperium came slowly to see a hard and simple truth. Endless quarrel over trade would ruin them all. Each great house, proud and old and jealous of its neighbors, wished to grow richer than the rest, and each looked upon the wealth of the worlds as a prize to be seized. But when the mighty struggle without limit over the same riches, they do not enlarge those riches. They only burn them, in ruinous rivalry, in wars that empty the treasuries of victor and vanquished alike. The families had learned this lesson many times over, in blood and in ashes, and at last enough of them grew weary of learning it again. Let yourself imagine the shape of the problem as it must have appeared to them. Picture a great many powerful houses, each with its own fleets, its own worlds, its own hunger for gain, all reaching toward the same flowing wealth of trade. If each house grasps freely and without restraint, then every road of commerce becomes a battlefield, every cargo a temptation to piracy, every profitable market a cause for war. The wealth that might have been shared and multiplied is instead spilled and wasted, and the very families who fought hardest for it end up poorer than before. It is the oldest trap of ambition that the harder each grasps alone, the less there is for all. And in a universe without thinking machines, where every account must be kept by human trust, such chaos would be ruin indeed. And so, out of weariness and out of wisdom, the great powers reach toward a different path. Rather than tear the wealth of the worlds apart in endless struggle, they chose to gather their many separate interests into one shared company, a single great combine in which each power would hold a portion and, in return, draw a portion of the profit. It was not friendship that drew them together, and it was not trust in any warm and gentle sense. It was something colder and steadier, and, in its own way, more reliable. It was the shared understanding that each of them would gain more from a peaceful division of the wealth than from a violent scramble for all of it. Self-interest, which so often drives the mighty into war, was turned instead toward a strange and lasting peace. This is the true birth of the CHOAM, and it is worth resting upon, for it is a birth unlike that of most great powers. The Combine was not founded by a conqueror planting a banner upon a hill. It was not raised by a prophet gathering the faithful, nor decreed by a single crown imposing its will. It was born as an agreement, a vast and patient arrangement among many powers who had grown tired of ruining one another. In place of the throne there was a table. In place of an army there was a ledger. In place of conquest, there was a careful counting of shares. The Combine came into being not as a kingdom, but as a way of not going to war. A machinery for dividing the riches of the worlds, so that none need burn them fighting over the whole. Consider how each power would find its place within this shared thing. Every great house that joined would hold some portion of the combine, some measure of its ownership, and that portion would entitle it to a matching portion of all the profit the combine gathered from the trade of the worlds. The more of the company a house held, the more of the endless flowing wealth would return to it, quietly and regularly, without the need to seize anything by force. In this way, each house had a reason to want the combine to prosper, for the prosperity of the whole became the prosperity of every part. A house that raided the trade of the combine would only be robbing itself, since it owned a share of that very trade. The old temptation to grasp was turned, cleverly and gently, back upon itself. And so a strange and durable peace settled over the commerce of the Imperium, a peace held together not by love, but by mutual advantage. Each power watched the others, and each knew it was watched in turn, and all of them understood that the arrangement served them better than the chaos it had replaced. The combine grew, gathering more and more of the trade of the worlds into its shared ownership, until at last there was almost nothing bought or sold between the stars in which the CHOAM did not hold some portion. What had begun as a truce among weary rivals became the very framework of the universe economy, the quiet structure through which nearly all the wealth of the worlds would flow for ages to come. There is a deep restfulness in the thought of it, a peace built out of the honest recognition of self-interest. The great powers did not need to become kind to one another. They did not need to lay down their pride or forget their old rivalries. They needed only to see, clearly and coldly, that they would all be richer together than apart, and upon that simple and durable insight they built a company that would outlast crowns and dynasties. It is a peace that asks nothing of the heart, only of the reckoning mind, and perhaps that is why it has endured so long. Warm alliances cool and break, but a cold and well-counted agreement in which every party truly gains can hold for centuries. Notice, too, what kind of thing the combine became because of how it was born. Because it grew from an agreement among many, it belonged to no single one of them completely. It was a shared vessel, and each power held only an oar, and no single hand could steer it entirely alone. This shared ownership is the very heart of the combine character, the reason it is a partnership and not a throne. The great families, the crown itself, and the strange quiet guild that carries the ships between the stars, all of these came to hold portions of the same company, all seated, in a manner of speaking, around the same great table. And around that table there would grow a careful balance, each power weighing the others, none daring to seize too much, all bound together by the same patient arrangement. We will return to that table many times in the quiet hours ahead, for it is there that the true balance of the Imperium is kept. We will see who holds the greatest portion, and who holds the largest gathered weight, and who holds a seat that speaks softly, yet cannot be refused. We will see how the shares translate into a kind of power that needs no army, and how the whole vast machine of trade turns upon a quiet and watchful peace. But all of that grows from this single seed, this one old decision made by weary and clever powers long ago, to gather their interests into one shared combine rather than ruin themselves in endless war. So let this gentle truth settle over you as your thoughts begin to slow. A peace born not of love, but of good sense. A company born not as a kingdom, but as an agreement. A great table set among the mighty, where the wealth of the worlds is divided rather than fought over, so that all may draw from it without burning it away. There is comfort in the thought of ancient rivals choosing, at last, the quiet path of shared advantage over the loud and wasteful path of war. The wealth flows, the shares are counted, the peace holds, and nothing needs to be seized. Let that image of patient and untroubled arrangement carry you softly, easily, gently down toward the deep and welcome stillness of sleep. There is a difference between a throne and a fortune, and the Imperium is held together by both of them at once, woven so closely that many never learn to tell them apart. A throne is a seat of command, a place from which orders are given and obeyed, a visible and dazzling thing crowned with ceremony and defended with steel. A fortune is something quieter and, in its own patient way, something deeper. It is not a place from which one commands, but a current that flows beneath all command, shaping what is possible before any order is ever spoken. To understand the true balance of the worlds, you must learn to see both the throne and the fortune, and to feel how differently each one holds its power. At the very summit of the visible power sits the Padishah Emperor. He rules from the throne, and his word carries across the worlds as law, and at his command stand the most fearsome soldiers in all the Imperium. These are the Sardaukar, warriors trained upon a cruel and merciless world until they became something harder and deadlier than ordinary soldiers. A force so terrible that the mere thought of them keeps many a proud house obedient and quiet. This is the visible face of power, the throne and the sword together, the crown that commands and the army that enforces. It is the kind of power that we learn to recognize from our earliest years, loud and bright and unmistakable, the power that announces itself and expects to be obeyed. And yet, for all its dazzle, the throne is not the whole of power, nor even, perhaps, the deepest part of it. Beneath the visible face of crown and sword there flows a river of wealth, quiet and vast and unceasing, and whoever draws from that river shapes the true balance of the worlds far more than any single command ever could. An army must be fed and armed and paid, and all of that comes from wealth. A throne must maintain itself, must reward its friends and hold its rivals in check, and all of that comes from wealth. Even the most fearsome soldiers in the universe are, in the end, sustained by the slow-flowing river of commerce, and so the fortune beneath the throne is not merely a decoration of power, but one of its true foundations. This is where the great combine takes its place in the shape of things, for the CHOAM is the very channel through which that river of wealth runs. If the throne is the visible face of power, then the combine is the hidden circulation beneath it, the flow that feeds and shapes everything above. The emperor may sit upon the throne and command the Sardaukar, but the emperor must also draw from the river of wealth, and to draw from it, he must hold his portion of the combine like any other power. In this way, even the highest throne in the universe is bound to the quiet company, dependent upon the same flowing wealth that sustains the houses it commands. The crown rules the worlds, but the fortune runs beneath the crown, and the two are not the same thing. Rest for a moment upon this gentle distinction, for it lies at the heart of everything we will explore in the hours ahead. Imagine two kinds of strength held by the same hand. In one hand, the throne, bright and commanding, the power to give orders and to enforce them with terrible soldiers. In the other hand, the fortune, quiet and deep, the power to shape what is possible before any order is given, to feed the armies, to reward the loyal, to bend the world simply by holding the wealth that everyone else needs. A ruler who held only the throne without the fortune would find his commands growing hollow, for he could not sustain the very force that gives commands their weight. And a power that held only the fortune, without any throne, might still shape the worlds profoundly, quietly, from beneath, without ever once sitting in a visible seat of command. This is why the combine matters so greatly, and why we return to it again and again. It is the place where the fortune of the whole Imperium is gathered and divided, the channel through which the deep river of wealth is guided and shared. The throne sits above, dazzling and loud, but the combine flows below, quiet and essential, and the wise among the powers understand that the two must be held together. The emperor upon his throne must also be a great holder of the fortune, or his power would begin to thin and fade. The great houses, who bow to the throne in matters of command, hold their own portions of the fortune, and through those portions they keep a weight of their own that even the throne must respect. The balance of the worlds is the balance between the throne and the fortune, and the combine is where that balance is quietly kept. Consider how differently these two powers behave. The throne must always be seen, for a command unseen is no command at all. It must announce itself with ceremony, defend itself with soldiers, and answer every challenge openly, lest its authority appear weak. The throne is therefore always a little anxious, always watchful, always aware that its power depends upon being recognized and obeyed. But the fortune has no such anxiety. It does not need to be seen to work. It flows beneath everything, shaping the ground on which the throne must stand, and it can wait with endless patience, gathering strength quietly while the throne busies itself with the loud affairs of command. There is something deeply restful in the nature of the fortune, in its silence, in its patience, in its refusal to shout. And so the Imperium is held together by both these powers at once, the loud and the quiet, the throne and the fortune, and neither one alone would be enough. Take away the throne and its terrible soldiers, and the fortune would have no visible order to protect it, no law to keep the peace among the grasping powers. Take away the fortune and its flowing wealth, and the throne would soon find itself unable to feed its soldiers or reward its friends, a bright crown resting upon an empty treasury. The two must lean upon one another, the visible and the hidden, the commanding and the sustaining, and the place where they meet and mingle is the great combine, the channel of the river, the quiet company that touches every kind of trade. There is a peace in seeing power this way, seeing it whole, seeing both its loud face and its quiet depths. So much of what troubles us in the world comes from watching only the loud face, the thrones and the armies and the announcements, and forgetting the quiet river flowing beneath. But when you learn to see the fortune as well as the throne, the whole arrangement of power grows calmer and more understandable, less like a storm of clashing wills and more like a slow and steady circulation. Wealth flowing beneath command, command resting upon wealth, the two turning together in a long and patient balance. It is a balance old beyond counting, and it turns without haste, and there is nothing in it that need trouble your rest. So let the throne and the fortune settle side by side in your quieting mind. The bright seat of command, with its ceremony and its fearsome soldiers. The deep river of wealth, quiet and patient, flowing beneath all command and shaping what the throne can do. And between them, joining them, the great combine, the channel through which the river runs, the place where the fortune of the worlds is gathered and shared. In the hours still to come, we will draw closer to that table and see how the shares and the seats divide this quiet power among the mighty. But for now, there is only the gentle understanding that power wears two faces, one loud and one still, and that beneath every throne there flows a fortune. Let that quiet river carry your thoughts along its slow and easy current, down and down, gently, toward the deep and welcome stillness of sleep. The power of the great company is not measured in the way that most people imagine power to be measured. It cannot be counted in soldiers standing in rows, nor in fortresses raised upon high ground, nor in the reach of any single crown. The power of the combine rests instead upon two quiet things, upon directorships and upon shares. And once you understand these two soft words, you begin to see the true shape of the whole Imperium as it turns slowly in the dark. A directorship is a seat at a great and ancient table, and that table is the place where the decisions of all trade are made. To hold a directorship is to be one of the few who may speak when the flow of wealth between the worlds is discussed, to be one of the hands that guides the endless river of commerce this way or that. There are only so many of these seats, and they are guarded more closely than any treasure, for a seat at that table is worth more than any single cargo, more than any single planet, more than almost anything that can be carried in a ship. A share is the other quiet thing, and it is simpler to hold in the mind. A share is a portion of the endless profit that the company gathers from every corner of the settled worlds. Wherever something is bought, wherever something is sold, wherever a cargo crosses the black gulf between one star and another, a small measure of that trade flows back into the great pool of the Combine, and those who hold shares draw from that pool according to how many shares they hold. To own a single share is to be wealthy. To own very many shares is to grow rich beyond any counting a mind can easily do. Think for a moment of how these two things differ, for it matters greatly. To hold shares is to grow rich, but riches alone do not decide the fate of the worlds. To hold a directorship is to help decide how the wealth of all the worlds shall move, and that is a different and deeper kind of strength. A great house might gather many shares and grow fat with profit, and yet still have little voice in how the company is steered. Another power might hold fewer shares and yet sit at the table where the true choices are made. And so the game of the Combine is played upon two boards at once, the board of wealth and the board of voice, and the mighty of the Imperium play upon both with great and patient care. The seats and the shares together form a kind of hidden map of who truly matters in the vast machine of the Empire. You could look upon the throne worlds and the banners of the great houses and think you understood who held the power. Yet the truer map is written in the ledgers of the Combine, in the quiet columns that record how many shares each power holds and how many seats each power commands. That map is rarely shown to common eyes, and yet it is the map that decides more than almost any war ever could. Because the seats are so few and the shares are so precious, they are never given away lightly. A share may pass from one hand to another only through long and careful arrangement, through marriage and through treaty, through debt and through the settling of debt, through the slow trading of favor for favor across the long years. A directorship is guarded even more jealously, for to gain a seat one power must often wait for another to falter, and the falling of a great house at that table is watched by all the others with a hunger that is never spoken aloud. There is a gentleness to how this power moves, and that gentleness is part of its strength. No army marches when a share changes hands. No trumpet sounds when a seat at the table shifts from one house to another. The whole vast rearrangement of wealth happens in quiet rooms, in soft words, and in the careful marking of ledgers. And the worlds go on turning as they always have, most of the people upon them never knowing that the true balance of everything has tilted a small measure in the night. This quietness is why so few ever truly see the company, even though its hand rests upon nearly everything they touch. Consider what it means to gather shares slowly across the generations. A house that is patient, that marries well and manages its holdings with care, may add a small measure of shares in each lifetime, and over many lifetimes that small measure may swell into a great fortune. Another house, proud and careless, may spend its shares to cover its debts, or lose them in some rash venture, and slowly sink from greatness into shadow. The company remembers all of this. It keeps its long accounts. and in those accounts is written the slow rise and the slow fall of the mighty across the centuries. The directorships carry with them not only voice, but also duty, for those who sit at the table are meant to guard the health of the whole company, and the health of the company is bound to the health of all trade. A director who thinks only of the profit of his own house may harm the pool from which all draw, and so there is a constant and quiet tension at the table, a pulling between what serves the one and what serves the many. This tension is never resolved. It only turns and turns, year upon year, like a wheel that never comes to rest. And the turning of that wheel is the turning of the Imperium itself. To the sleeping mind it may seem strange that so much of the fate of countless worlds should rest upon such soft and bloodless things, upon seats and shares, upon columns of figures in a ledger. And yet this is the deep truth of the empire without thinking machines, that the counting of wealth fell back into human hands, and human hands gathered that counting into one great and shared design. The seats and the shares are the joints and sinews of that design, the quiet places where the whole vast body of trade bends and moves. When you hear that a power holds many shares, let it settle softly in your mind as a great and gentle weight, a fortune so large that it need never be spent to be felt. When you hear that a power holds a seat at the table, let it settle as a quiet voice, one of the few that may speak when the wealth of the worlds is guided. And when a power holds both the great weight of shares and the quiet voice of a seat, then you are looking upon one of the true pillars of the Imperium. Whether or not that power ever raises a banner or draws a blade. The whole company, then, is a table of seats and a pool of shares. And around that table and above that pool, the mighty of the worlds arrange themselves in a slow and careful dance. Each one watches the others. Each one counts its own holdings and guesses at the holdings of the rest. Each one knows that a seat gained or a share lost may shift the balance of everything. And yet, the shifting is so quiet, so patient, so wrapped in soft words and long custom, that from the outside all seems still. And so the power of the Combine rests, as it has rested for uncounted years, upon these two quiet things: the directorships, the seats at the great table where trade is decided, the shares, the portions of the endless profit that flows from world to world. Hold this softly in your thoughts as you drift, the image of a wide table in a still room, and around it the patient counting of the wealth of all the stars, moving so gently that it makes no sound at all, only the quiet turning of the great wheel, year upon year, in the deep and endless dark. At the head of the great table, in the seat above all other seats, sits a single figure, and that figure is the Padishah Emperor himself. In the days of this long tale, his name is Shaddam IV, ruler of the known worlds, master of the fearsome soldiers called the Sardaukar, and keeper of the golden throne. Yet when he sits at the table of the Combine, he does not sit there only as an emperor. He sits there as the greatest holder of shares in all the settled reaches of the stars, and this is a truth worth resting upon gently, for it shows how the crown and the fortune are bound into one. Most people, when they think of the emperor, think of the throne and the soldiers, of the visible face of power that all the worlds are meant to see. They think of the ceremonies and the banners, of the vast armies of the Sardaukar, who are feared across every planet. And all of that is real, and all of that is heavy. Yet beneath that bright and visible face flows a quieter river, the river of wealth that runs through the Combine, and the emperor draws from that river more deeply than any other single power in the whole design. For the throne holds the greatest single portion of the shares. No other house, standing alone, can match the number of shares that gather in the emperor's hands. And so, the emperor grows rich in two ways at once, in a doubling of fortune that few other powers can imagine. He grows rich from the taxes of all his worlds, the tribute that flows upward from every fief and every planet toward the throne. And he grows rich again from the trade of those same worlds, from his great share of the profit that the Combine gathers from every cargo that crosses the dark. The taxes and the trade together swell his fortune to a size that has no true rival. Think of what this means as it settles softly in the mind. Every cargo that lifts from a spaceport, every load of grain and metal and cloth and rare thing that crosses between the stars, carries within it a small quiet measure that flows back into the great pool of the Combine, and the largest share of that pool is drawn by the throne. The Emperor need not lift a single crate nor guard a single ship. He need only hold his shares, and the wealth of the moving worlds flows to him as surely as water flows downhill, gathering and gathering without cease. This is why the crown and the company lend strength to one another, each one making the other greater. The throne gives the emperor the visible power, the soldiers and the ceremony and the law. The company gives him the hidden power, the deep fortune that lets him pay for those soldiers, that lets him wait when others must act in haste, that lets him bend the will of lesser powers not with a blade, but with the quiet promise of profit or the quiet threat of its loss. A throne without a fortune would be a hollow thing, quick to totter. A fortune without a throne would be a soft thing, quick to be seized. Together they form a single hard center around which the whole Imperium turns. It is worth resting a moment upon how patient this hidden power allows the emperor to be. A ruler who depended only upon taxes might be pressed for coin, might be forced into haste when his coffers ran low, might have to bargain from weakness when a season turned against him. But the emperor draws also from the endless flow of trade, and that flow does not falter with the seasons of any single world, for it gathers from all the worlds at once. And so the throne is fed by a river so wide and so steady that it need never run dry. And this steadiness gives the emperor the rarest of all luxuries among the mighty, the luxury of time. He can wait where others must act. He can watch where others must move. And in that quiet patience lies a strength greater than any sudden stroke. And yet, and this is the gentle mystery of it, the emperor's great holding of shares does not make him free to do as he pleases. It binds him as much as it lifts him. For the emperor's wealth flows from the same trade that fills the fortunes of all the great houses. And if that trade were ever to falter, his river would run dry along with theirs. He cannot ruin the commerce of the worlds without ruining himself. He cannot let the flow of wealth stop, for his own fortune depends upon its ceaseless motion. And so the greatest holder of shares is also, in a quiet way, the servant of the very trade he seems to command, kept careful by his own hunger for its continued flow. There is more, for the emperor's seat at the head of the table places him always in the sight of every other power. Because he holds the most, every other holder watches him the most closely. The great houses count his shares as carefully as they count their own, and they measure their safety by the gap between his holding and their combined holding. The emperor knows this watching, and it shapes his every choice. He cannot grasp too openly for more, for the sight of the throne swelling too fast would draw the fear of all the houses at once, and their fear, if it ever gathered into one, could shake even him. So the greatest fortune in the Imperium is also the most closely guarded and the most closely observed, a bright center that dares not shine too bright. Consider the strange loneliness of that highest seat. The emperor sits above all others, and yet he sits surrounded by rivals who smile and bow and mark his every move. His wealth is beyond counting, and yet it is a wealth that must be tended and defended without rest, for the same shares that lift him make him the target of every quiet scheme. He commands the Sardaukar, the most fearsome soldiers ever raised, and yet even they must be paid. And they are paid from the river of trade, and so even the sharpest blade of the empire is fed by the soft and endless flow of commerce that the Combine gathers. The bond between the crown and the company runs so deep that one can hardly speak of the emperor without speaking of his shares, nor speak of the Combine without speaking of the throne at its head. The two have grown together across the long centuries, root and branch, until they can no longer be told apart. When the emperor acts, the company feels it. When the company shifts, the throne feels it in turn. They are two faces of a single power, one turned toward the light of ceremony and law, the other turned toward the quiet dark of ledgers and shares. And so, when you picture the emperor upon his golden throne, add to that picture a second and softer image, the image of the same figure seated at the head of the great table of trade, quietly holding the largest portion of all the wealth that moves between the stars. See how the crown rests upon the fortune, and the fortune rests upon the crown, each one holding the other up. See how the soldiers are fed by the river of commerce, and how the river of commerce is guarded by the soldiers. The whole vast machine of the empire balances upon this single joining, the throne and the shares made one in a single pair of hands. Let this settle gently as you drift towards sleep. The thought of a fortune so large that it need never be spent, gathering quietly from every corner of the moving worlds, flowing upward, without haste toward a single high seat. And let it settle too, that even the mightiest of holders is held in place by the very wealth he holds, kept careful, kept watchful, kept bound to the endless flow he cannot afford to stop. The greatest shareholder of all sits at the head of the table, and around him the wealth of the stars turns slowly, gathering and gathering in the deep and quiet dark, while the whole Imperium breathes on, soft and even, in the long night between the worlds. The emperor does not sit alone at the great table, for facing him across its wide and quiet expanse are the great houses, gathered together in the ancient council that is called the Landsraad. To understand the balance of the whole Imperium, you must hold these two powers in your mind at once, the single throne at the head of the table and the many houses ranged along its sides. For it is the slow and careful weighing of one against the other that keeps the worlds from falling into ruin. A great house is a noble family that holds a fief, a world or a portion of a world given into its keeping, and from that fief it draws its wealth and its name. Some of these houses are very old, their lines stretching back across more years than can easily be counted. Some are younger, risen through fortune or favor into the high company of the mighty. Each one holds its own shares in the Combine, and each one guards those shares as a measure of its standing. For in the ledgers of the company is written the true rank of every house, quieter and more honest than any banner or boast. Taken one by one, no single house can match the throne. The emperor holds the greatest single portion of the shares, and against his holding any one house, however proud, is only a small and careful weight. A house standing alone must bow to the throne, must send its tribute and hold its tongue and choose its ventures with an eye always upon the will of the crown. This is the loneliness of a single house, that in isolation it is always the lesser power, always the one that must yield when the throne presses upon it. Yet here lies the deep and gentle secret of the Landsraad, the truth that keeps the whole design in balance. Taken all together, the many houses hold a portion of the Combine even larger than the emperor's own. Add the shares of one house to the shares of another, and to another still, across the long roll of the great houses of the Landsraad. and the sum of all their holdings rises above the single great holding of the throne. And so, though no house alone can face the emperor, the houses gathered as one hold a weight that even the throne must respect. This great shared weight is the quiet counterbalance at the heart of the empire, the thing that keeps the crown from grasping all. Think of it as two hands upon a single beam, one hand the throne and the other the gathered houses, each pressing with a weight so nearly equal that the beam hangs almost level between them. If the throne pressed too hard, the houses together could press back. If the houses fell to quarreling among themselves, the throne could press them down one by one. And so each side is kept careful by the other, and the beam hangs level, and the worlds go on turning, in a peace that is not built upon trust, but upon a very old and very patient balance of weight against weight. This is why the throne is always careful. The emperor knows, as every emperor before him has known, that the houses of the Landsraad could, if ever they truly united, gather a voice and a weight of shares great enough to check even the crown. He knows that they hold together a portion larger than his own, and so he never presses upon all of them at once. He plays them against one another, favors one and shadows another, keeps them divided by old rivalries and fresh jealousies, so that the great gathered weight of the Landsraad never falls into a single hand at a single moment. For the danger to the throne is not any one house, however mighty. The danger is the union of the many. And the houses, for their part, know their own strength and their own weakness alike. They know that together they outweigh the throne, and this knowledge gives them a quiet courage. Yet they know too how hard it is to gather that weight into one, how the old feuds run deep, how each house guards its own honor and its own advantage, how the very pride that makes a house great also makes it slow to yield to any common cause. The Landsraad is a council of equals who do not always love one another, and so its great weight is real but slow to move, a mighty thing that stirs rarely and with difficulty, like a deep tide that turns only when the moon of some great cause draws it. There is a further reason why the gathered houses matter so much, and it lies in the long memory of them all. Each house remembers the rise and fall of the others across the centuries, remembers which lines climbed and which lines sank, remembers the old favors and the old wrongs. This shared memory is itself a kind of weight, for no house acts without weighing how the others will remember its deeds. A house that grasped too greedily would be remembered as a danger by all the rest, and that remembering would follow it down the generations. And so the great gathered weight of the Landsraad presses not only in the present moment, but across time, holding each house careful with the long judgment of all the others. The Landsraad is more than a gathering for the counting of shares. It is also a council of law and custom, a place where the great houses may speak against wrongs done to them, where the ancient forms are kept, where even the emperor must observe the old agreements that bind throne and houses together. If a house is wronged, it may raise its voice in that council, and the other houses may listen. And in the listening lies a kind of protection, for a house that stands alone is weak, but a house whose cause is taken up by others draws upon the great gathered weight of them all. This is why the forms of the Landsraad are guarded so carefully, for they are the channel through which the many may, when they must, act as one. There is a beauty in this balance when you look upon it gently, the beauty of a thing that has held itself steady across uncounted years without any single hand to guide it. No one designed the perfect level of the beam. It arose slowly, out of the long weighing of throne against houses, each learning across the centuries just how far it might press and just how far it might yield. The peace of the Imperium is not the peace of a single ruler who commands all. It is the peace of a balance, of weight set against weight, of the throne and the Landsraad, each holding the other in a grip so old and so practiced that it has come to feel like stillness. And so, when you picture the great table of the Combine, do not picture only the single high seat at its head. Picture also the long sides of the table, and along them the many seats of the great houses, each holding its own portion, each watching the throne and watching the others, each knowing that alone it is the lesser, but together it is the greater. Picture the quiet weight of the Landsraad, so vast when gathered and so slow to gather, hanging opposite the throne upon the ancient beam of the empire, holding it level year upon year. Let this rest softly in your mind as you sink towards sleep. The image of a wide beam hanging almost perfectly level, the throne pressing gently upon one end, and the gathered houses pressing gently upon the other, neither able to overturn the other, both kept careful by the weight they cannot ignore. The worlds turn on beneath that balance, quiet and untroubled, most of the people upon them never knowing how finely their peace is weighed. And the great table stands in its still room, the throne at its head and the houses along its sides, all of them counting, all of them watching, all of them held in a long and patient stillness that has lasted longer than any of them can remember, gentle as a held breath in the deep dark between the stars. There is a third power seated at the great table, and it is the softest of them all, the one whose voice is heard least often, and yet whose hand rests most surely upon everything that moves. This is the Spacing Guild, and to understand the balance of the whole design, you must understand why so quiet a power holds so much. For the Guild asks for little that can be seen, and yet without its silent leave, nothing at all crosses the dark between the worlds. The reason for the Guild's strength is simple and vast at once. The Guild alone can carry ships between the stars. In all the settled reaches of the Imperium, in all the long roll of the great houses and the throne itself, there is no other power that can fold the terrible distances of space and bring a ship safely from one world to another. This is a thing that no house owns, that no army can seize, that no fortune alone can buy. The folding of space is the Guild's and the Guild's alone. And because all trade must cross that space, all trade must pass through the Guild's patient hands. Think of what this means as it settles gently in the mind. A cargo may be gathered upon one world at great cost and great care. A fortune may be waiting for it upon another world across the gulf. Yet between the two lies the vast and empty dark, and only the Guild can carry the cargo across it. Without the Guild, the cargo would sit forever in its spaceport, the fortune forever unclaimed, the two worlds forever sundered by a distance no house could cross. And so the whole of trade, the whole endless river of wealth that fills the Combine, depends first and last upon the Guild that alone can move it from star to star. Because of this, the Guild too holds shares and a voice within the Combine, seated at the great table alongside the throne and the gathered houses. It could hardly be otherwise, for a power that carries all trade must have a place among those who share in the profit of that trade. Yet the Guild's seat is a strange one, quieter than any other, for the Guild does not hunger for the visible things that the houses hunger for. It does not seek fiefs, nor banners, nor the bright ceremonies of power. It seeks only what it needs to continue its silent work, and above all, it seeks the spice, for reasons that lie folded deep within its own nature. The Guild asks for little that can be seen, and this is part of the source of its power, where the throne must be watched because it grasps openly, and the houses must be counted because they scheme against one another. The Guild simply carries, quiet and steady, year upon year, asking only its due and troubling no one who does not trouble it. It does not raise armies, It does not plot for thrones. It does not gather fiefs into its keeping. And precisely because it asks for so little of the visible world, it is left in undisturbed command of the one thing that matters most, the crossing of the dark, which is the foundation beneath all the rest. Consider how gentle and how absolute this power is. The guild need never threaten. It need only be, only continue its quiet carrying. And every other power at the table must shape its plans around the guild's patient service. A house may dream of any venture across the worlds, but the venture is only a dream until the guild agrees to carry it. An emperor may command any movement of soldiers or goods, but the command waits upon the guild's ships. Nothing moves between the worlds without the guild's silent leave. And so the softest voice at the table is, in a way that is rarely spoken aloud, the one that all the others must in the end obey. And yet the guild is not free either, for its power rests upon a single thread as fragile as the power of all the rest. The folding of space, the great gift that makes the guild what it is made possible only by the spice. Without the melange, the guild's navigators could not see the safe path through the dark, and the ships would fall still, and the whole of trade would freeze in an instant. And so the guild, for all its quiet mastery, is bound as tightly as any house to the flow of spice from the desert world. The carrier of all trade is itself carried upon a thread of spice, and that thread runs back, as every thread in this whole design runs back, to a single burning world of sand. This is the deep and gentle irony at the heart of the guild's power, that the one who moves all things is itself moved by a need it cannot escape. The guild holds the whole of trade in its hands, and yet the guild's own hands are held by the spice. It could stop the worlds if it chose, and yet it dares not let the spice fail, for the failing of the spice would blind its navigators and still its ships and end the very carrying that makes it mighty. And so the softest power at the table is also, in its secret heart, the most anxious guardian of the flow of melange, watching that flow with a patience and a dread that runs deeper than any others. There is something worth resting upon in the strange balance of the guild's position, for it holds at once the most power and the most quiet worry. It could halt all trade with a single choice, and yet it would never make that choice, for to halt trade would be to halt the flow of spice, and the flow of spice is the very thing that keeps the guild alive. And so the guild guards the movement of the worlds as a mother guards a sleeping child, gently, ceaselessly, never wishing to disturb the thing it needs, never wishing to see it come to harm. The greatest power at the table is thus also the most tender guardian of the peace, for its own life depends upon the quiet continuance of all the rest. There is a great stillness to the guild when you hold it gently in the mind. Picture its ships as vast, quiet shapes drifting between the stars, folding the dark so softly that the folding makes no sound, carrying the wealth of the worlds without haste and without display. Picture its navigators lost in the deep sight the spice gives them, seeing the safe path through the emptiness, guiding the ships along threads that no other eyes can perceive. Picture the whole of trade flowing through these silent shapes, and no crown and no house able to move a single cargo without their leave. This is power without noise, power that need never raise its voice to be felt everywhere at once. And so the third seat at the great table belongs to the quietest of all the mighty, the Spacing Guild, holder of the dark, carrier of all trade, servant of the spice. It shares in the profit of the combine because it carries the profit itself from world to world. It holds a voice at the table because nothing at the table could move without it. And yet it hungers for so little of the visible world that most people never think of it at all, never guessing that the softest hand of all is the one beneath every cargo they have ever seen or touched. Let this settle gently as you drift towards sleep, the image of great silent ships folding the darkness between the stars, carrying the wealth of the worlds without a sound, guided by navigators lost in the deep sight of the spice. Let it settle that the quietest power is often the surest, that the one who asks for least may hold the most, that nothing at all crosses the vast dark without the silent leave of a patient and unhurried hand. And let the whole picture rest soft and still in your mind, the great table with its three-seated powers, the throne and the houses and the guild, all of them bound together by threads that run back to a single desert world, all of them turning slowly in the long and quiet night between the stars. Now, we come softly to the heart of the whole matter, to the single thing without which all the seats and all the shares and all the patient counting would be no more than marks upon a page. For the wealth of the combine, vast as it is, rests in the end upon one substance alone, and that substance is the spice, the melange, the true coin of the entire universe. Everything you have heard of thrones and fortunes and quiet balances gathers at last around this one precious thing, and so it is worth resting upon it gently and at length as sleep draws near. The shares of the combine would be only numbers if there were nothing beneath them to give them worth. A share is a portion of profit, and profit is only wealth that flows, and wealth flows only where there is something worth carrying between the worlds. And of all the things that are bought and sold across the settled reaches, one stands so far above the rest that it gives value to nearly everything else. That one thing is the melange, and it is not merely the most precious of goods. It is the very foundation upon which the worth of the whole company stands, the coin against which all other coins are measured. Consider first what the spice does for the body and the mind. The melange lengthens life, so that those who take it may live far beyond the span given to those who never touch it. It stirs a kind of health and vigor in those who use it, a brightness of the flesh that no other thing can give. And to some, it opens the inner sight, a widening of awareness, a deepening of the mind toward things that lie beyond ordinary seeing. For these gifts alone the spice would be treasured beyond gold. For what will a person not give for more years of life, for more brightness, for a glimpse past the ordinary walls of the mind? Yet the deepest reason for the spice's worth lies not in the body nor even in the mind, but in the dark spaces between the stars. For above all else, the melange makes possible the folding of space, the great crossing of the vast gulfs that lie between one world and another. Without the spice, the navigators of the guild could not see the safe path through the dark, and the ships could not fold the terrible distances, and no cargo could cross from star to star. The spice is the thread upon which all travel hangs, and travel is the thread upon which all trade hangs, and so the spice is the thread upon which the whole moving wealth of the Imperium is strung. Hold this in your mind gently, for it is the key to everything. If the spice were to fail, the ships would fall still. If the ships fell still, the worlds would be sundered, each cast back into its own loneliness, unable to reach any other. If the worlds were sundered, the trade between them would cease, and the great river of wealth that fills the combine would run dry in an instant. And every fortune built upon that river would turn to dust. And so every share, every seat, every quiet holding at the great table depends in the end upon the ceaseless flow of this single substance. Burn away the spice, and you burn away the worth of everything. This is why the melange is called the true coin of the universe, and the name is more than a fine phrase. coin is a thing that gives value to trade, a measure against which all other things are weighed. The spice does this and far more, for it does not merely measure the wealth of the worlds, it makes that wealth possible at all. Every other precious thing, every rare metal and fine cloth and costly good, has worth only because it can be carried between the worlds. And it can be carried only because of the spice. And so the spice stands beneath all other value, the coin beneath every coin, the treasure that gives all other treasures their meaning. There is a strange beauty in the thought that so much power should rest upon a single substance, quiet and fine, gathered from the sand. The throne commands its soldiers, and the houses hold their fiefs, and the guild folds the dark, and all of them, every one, bend at last toward the spice. It is a humbling thought, when you hold it gently, that the mightiest of rulers and the oldest of houses and the most patient of the guild are alike in this one need, each of them a servant of the same fine dust, each of them unable to stand for even a single season without it. In the shared need for the spice, the highest and the lowest of the powers become at last the same, all of them turning toward one still center, all of them bound by one thread. It is the still center around which all the mighty turn, the thing that each of them must have, the need that binds them all together, whether they love one another or not. The whole vast design of thrones and chairs and seats is in truth a single great arrangement for the gathering and sharing of this one precious flow. Think for a moment of how fragile a foundation this is, and how gentle a truth it holds. All the weight of the empire, all the fortunes beyond counting, all the patient balance of throne against houses, and the silent mastery of the guild rest upon a substance that must be gathered grain by grain from the sand of the worlds. There is no thing more precious and no thing more needed, and yet it is only a fine dust in the end, only a substance that can be gathered or lost, that can flow or cease to flow. The mightiest empire ever raised among the stars balances upon a coin of dust, and this is the deep and quiet wonder at the center of it all. And because the spice is so precious and so needed, it shapes the desires of every power at the table. The throne desires it, for its fortune depends upon the flow. The houses desire it, for their wealth and even their long lives depend upon it. The guild desires it above all, for without it the ships would be blind and still. Every eye in the Imperium turns, sooner or later, toward the spice, and every plan and every scheme and every quiet arrangement bends toward the securing of its flow. There is no power so great that it does not need the spice, and no power so small that it does not feel the spice's pull. So let this settle softly and deeply as you drift toward sleep, the thought of a single precious substance beneath the whole weight of the worlds. Let it settle that the shares are only numbers until the spice gives them worth, that the seats are only chairs until the spice gives them meaning, that the whole great table of the combine stands upon this one quiet foundation. Let it settle that the melange lengthens life and opens the mind and folds the very dark between the stars, and that without it every ship would fall still and every fortune would turn to dust. And picture it now, the true coin of the universe, fine and precious, gathered from the sand of a single world, flowing outward across all the reaches of the empire, binding throne and house and guild together in a single shared need. Everything you have heard of power and wealth gathers here, at this still and quiet center, where a substance no heavier than dust holds up the mightiest empire ever known. Let the ledgers close for a while, and let the counting fade, and let your mind rest upon that one gentle image, the spice flowing soft and endless through the dark, the coin beneath every coin, turning quietly at the heart of all things, while the worlds breathe slow and even in the long night between the stars. And here lies the strange and fragile truth that sits beneath all the counting and all the shares, that the precious coin of the whole Imperium is made upon one single world alone. In all the vast reaches of the settled stars, across the countless suns and the thousands upon thousands of worlds that owe their allegiance to the throne, there is only one place where the spice is born. That place is the desert planet Arrakis, the world that so many people across the darkness call by a simpler and older name. And that name is Dune. From its endless burning sands, the melange is gathered at great cost and at even greater danger. And from that one dry and lonely world, the wealth of every other world is quietly drawn. Think for a moment how strange this truly is, and let the strangeness settle over you softly like a warm and heavy blanket. The Imperium is unthinkably wide. There are worlds of green forest and worlds of blue water, worlds wrapped in cloud and worlds crusted in ice, worlds of gentle field and worlds of towering stone. Across all of them, the great houses build their palaces and gather their fortunes, and yet not one of these many worlds, not the richest garden nor the deepest mine, can make even the smallest measure of the spice. Only Arrakis can. Only the one desert holds the secret, and no laboratory and no cunning and no wealth has ever been able to make the melange anywhere else. For long ages, the wise and the powerful searched for another source, hoping to break the chain that bound the whole of trade to a single planet. They sent seekers to far and hidden worlds, and they studied the sands and the deep places, and they dreamed of finding a second Arrakis somewhere in the dark. Yet every search came back empty, and slowly the searching quieted, and the mighty came to accept the strange truth as a settled thing. The spice would come from Dune, or it would come from nowhere at all, and so every eye in the Imperium turned, in the end, toward that one small point of light in the endless night. The melange itself is a wonder beyond any ordinary treasure, and this is why the whole of the settled stars leans upon it so heavily. It is not merely a spice to season food, though it does carry a taste that lingers on the tongue and a scent that fills the air with something like warm cinnamon. It is far more than that. To those who take the melange, it lengthens the span of life, holding back the slow work of the years, so that the great and the wealthy who eat of it may live far longer than ordinary folk. This alone would make it precious past all reckoning, for there is no treasure that a long liver would not trade for still more years. Yet the spice does more even than this. It opens a kind of inner sight in those who are shaped to receive it, a widening of the mind that lets certain trained ones glimpse pathways that are hidden to all others. And above every other gift, the melange makes possible the folding of space itself. The great ships of the guild cannot leap across the terrible distances between the stars without it, for it is the spice, and the spice alone, that lets the guild navigators steer a safe course through the folded dark. Without the melange, those mighty ships would fall still and silent, and every world would drift apart into a lonely isolation, and every fortune built upon the flow of trade would crumble quietly into dust. So, you begin to see why the whole vast machine of the Imperium turns upon this one substance, and why the fact of its single source is the most important fact in all the counting of the shares. Every directorship at the great table, every portion of profit held by the throne and the houses and the guild, every fortune measured in the ledgers of the CHOAM, all of it rests in the end upon the sands of a single world. The company owns a share of nearly everything that is bought and sold between the stars, and yet the true root of all that wealth reaches down into the dunes of Arrakis and nowhere else. Now, let your thoughts travel gently to that far and burning world, and picture it as it truly is. Arrakis is a planet almost wholly of sand, a place where open water is so rare that it is counted more precious than any jewel, where the sun rises hard and white over dunes that stretch beyond the edge of sight. The wind moves across those dunes in slow and endless waves, shaping them and reshaping them, so that the whole face of the world seems always to be breathing. It is a harsh place and a beautiful one, quiet in its vastness, and beneath its quiet lies the source of all the wealth of the stars. The gathering of the spice upon that world is a labor of great peril, and this too is part of why the melange is so dear. The spice lies within the desert itself, out upon the open sand, far from any shelter. And to gather it, the harvesting crews must go out into the deep places where the world is most dangerous. There are storms upon Arrakis that can strip the flesh from bone and grind stone to powder. And there is the ever-present dread of the great worms of the desert, the vast and ancient creatures that move beneath the sand and rise where the spice is worked. To gather the melange is to go out among these dangers, and to come back is never a certain thing. Because of all this, the spice is not simply found and lifted, but wrested from a world that seems unwilling to give it. Each measure that reaches the ledgers of the CHOAM has been carried up out of the deep desert at a cost paid in sweat and in fear and often in lives. And yet, once it is gathered and carried away from those sands, it becomes the smooth and quiet coin that flows through every market of the Imperium, its danger forgotten, its origin unseen by nearly all who spend it. The people of 100 gentle worlds taste the melange and never think of the burning dunes from which it came. This is the fragile heart of the whole matter, and it is worth resting upon before sleep. The wealth of the mighty, the shares and the seats and the fortunes beyond counting, all of it hangs upon a single thread, and that thread is spun upon one desert world. If ever the spice of Arrakis were to fail, if ever those sands were to give no more melange, then the ships would still, and the fortunes would fall, and the whole grand structure of the Imperium would begin quietly to come apart. The mighty know this in the deep places of their minds, and it lends a hidden trembling to all their careful counting. And so the strangeness comes full circle and settles into something almost peaceful. A universe so wide that no mind can hold it, so full of worlds and wonders and treasures, is bound together in the end by the sand of a single planet. The coin of all that vastness is made in one place, gathered by weary hands under a hard white sun, carried out from among the worms and the storms, and sent flowing outward into the dark to fill the fortunes of those who will never once feel that desert wind upon their faces. Let that thought carry you softly now. The image of the endless dunes breathing slowly under the sky, the spice waiting quietly within the sand, the whole of the settled stars leaning gently upon that one far world. There is a strange calm in it, in knowing that so much rests upon so little, and that the great machine of trade turns upon a substance born of silence and sand. Breathe slowly, and let the desert be still in your mind, and let the knowledge of that single precious world rest lightly upon you as you drift down toward sleep. Because Arrakis alone holds the spice, the right to govern that one desert world becomes the most valuable prize in all the Imperium, and yet it is also, in its quiet way, a kind of trap. Whoever holds the fief of Dune may grow rich beyond dreaming from the endless flow of melange, drawing wealth from the sand faster than any ledger can easily count. And yet that same fortunate house stands alone upon a cruel and burning world, watched with envy by every rival and every jealous power. The gift of Arrakis is a gift wrapped carefully around a hidden blade, and to accept it is to reach for great riches while never being quite sure what your fingers will close upon. Let us rest for a while upon this strange doubleness, this way in which the greatest prize is also the greatest danger. In the ordinary manner of things, wealth brings safety, for the rich can build walls and buy loyalty and surround themselves with comfort. But the wealth of Arrakis is not like that. It does not bring safety. It brings, instead, a fierce and constant attention, the gaze of every powerful eye in the Imperium, all of them fixed upon the house that holds the spice, all of them wondering how that house might be weakened, or watched, or one day replaced. To hold Dune is to be the richest house at the table, and also the most surrounded. Consider first the world itself, before we even speak of rivals. Arrakis is not a gentle place that welcomes its lord. It is a desert almost without mercy, where open water is so scarce that the people must reclaim the very moisture of their own breath, where a person unprotected in the deep sand may die in a single day. The heat presses down without rest, and the great storms rise without warning, and beneath the dunes move the vast worms that no wall can truly keep away. A house that comes to rule Arrakis does not settle into ease. It comes to live upon a knife of stone and sand, spending much of its strength simply to endure the world it has been given. And the very thing that makes the world valuable, the spice, must be gathered out upon that hostile ground. The house that holds the fief cannot simply sit within a safe palace and let the wealth arrive. It must send its people out into the deep desert again and again, into the storms and the reach of the worms, to work the spice fields where the melange lies exposed upon the open sand. Every harvest is a small campaign, a venture into danger, and the Lord of Arrakis must weigh the loss of machines and crews against the gain of spice, over and over, without end. The fortune of Dune is not a still pool, but a swift and dangerous river, and one must wade into it to draw anything out. Now think of the envy that surrounds such a prize. Every great house in the Landsraad knows that whoever holds Arrakis holds the source of all the spice, and so every great house watches that holder with a hunger that is never quite hidden. The one who governs Dune has something that every other lord would give a great deal to possess, and this makes the holder both mighty and exposed. Alliances shift quietly in the shadows, and rivals whisper together, and the throne itself keeps a careful watch, for the crown too has its own reasons to be wary of any house grown too rich upon the sand. To hold the fief is to stand always in a bright and revealing light while others move in the comfortable dark around you. There is a further turn to the trap, and it is a subtle one. The wealth of Arrakis is so great that it can lift a house very high in a short span of years, and a house that rises quickly draws suspicion more surely than one that has always been great. If the holder of Dune grows too strong, too admired, too wealthy, then the balance around the great table begins to tremble, and those who fear that rising house begin to plan. So the very success that the spice brings can become the cause of a house's undoing, for to prosper too visibly upon Arrakis is to invite the fear and the scheming of all the others. The gift rewards its holder and endangers him with the very same hand. And there is the matter of standing alone. A house that holds an ordinary world may lean upon its neighbors, may draw comfort from being one among many, may hide within the crowd of the Landsraad. But the house that holds Arrakis is set apart, singled out, placed upon a stage where all can see it. It cannot blend into the safety of the many, for it holds a thing that no other holds, and this makes it lonely in a way that has nothing to do with distance. The Lord of Dune sits upon the richest prize in the Imperium, and yet finds himself, in the deepest sense, unaccompanied, watched by all, and truly befriended by few. There is also, folded into this trap, the burden of the past that every new holder inherits along with the sand. A house that comes to Arrakis does not arrive upon an empty world ready to be shaped anew. It arrives upon a world already worn by those who held it before, marked by their choices and their cruelties, filled with people who remember what has been done to them, and machinery driven hard and left to fail. The new Lord must take up not only the spice and its dangers, but the whole tangled weight of everything that came before. And he must do so while every rival watches to see whether the burden will break him. The prize arrives already heavy with history. And there is the slow exhaustion of vigilance, which wears upon a house more quietly than any single blow. To hold Arrakis is to be never quite able to rest, for the danger comes from so many directions at once. There is the world itself, always ready to kill the careless, and the constant labor of the spice fields, which can never be allowed to stop. There is the envy of the other houses, and the watchfulness of the throne, and the memory of enemies who may yet return. A house that holds the fief must guard against all of these at every hour, and such endless guarding drains even the strongest, so that the very act of keeping the prize gives no rest and grants no ease. Yet for all these dangers, the prize remains almost impossible to refuse, and this too is part of the trap. The wealth is simply too great, the flow of spice too vast, the promise too dazzling. When the fief of Arrakis is offered to a house, it comes clothed in honor and shining with the appearance of the highest favor, and to turn it away would seem both foolish and ungrateful. So houses reach for it, again and again across the long years, drawn by the riches and half blind to the blade folded within the gift. They see the fortune first, and only later, sometimes far too late, do they feel the edge that was always waiting inside it. This is why the story of Arrakis is a story that turns upon itself, a prize and a peril bound together so tightly that they cannot be pulled apart. To rule Dune is to be rich and endangered, honored and exposed, lifted high and set alone. The spice gives with one hand and the desert takes with the other, and the envy of the Imperium presses in from every side, and the throne watches, and the rivals whisper, and the great worms move beneath the sand. All of this is contained within that single word, the fief of Arrakis, a word that sounds like the greatest of blessings and hides within it the shape of a snare. Let this quiet truth settle over you now as the world grows soft around you. The most valuable thing in all the Imperium is also one of the most dangerous to hold, and those who reach for it reach toward both fortune and ruin at once. There is a strange stillness in understanding this, a sense that great prizes and great perils are often the very same thing wearing different faces, and that the brightest gift may carry the deepest shadow. Breathe slowly, and let the image of that burning world rest lightly in your mind, the sand shining under the hard sun, the spice waiting in the deep, the hidden blade folded quietly within the gift, as you drift gently down toward the calm of sleep. For a great span of years, longer than most lifetimes and long enough that many came to think it would never change, the fief of Arrakis was held by the Harkonnens, a house of cold and grasping temper. From the spice they gathered upon those endless sands, they grew immensely rich, hoarding wealth and shares until their fortune came to rival that of kings. They squeezed the desert for every measure of melange they could wring from it, caring nothing for the world itself nor for the people who labored upon it, thinking only of the endless profit that the sand poured, season after season, into their waiting hands. Let us look gently but clearly at the manner of this house, for it tells us much about how the wealth of Dune could shape those who held it. The Harkonnens were not a people warmed by the giving of anything. They were takers by nature, patient and calculating, and they saw in Arrakis not a world to be tended, but a treasure to be stripped. Where another house might have thought of the long care of the desert, of the people, of the balance of the sands, the Harkonnens thought only of the count. They asked always the same silent question: how much more can be taken? And they let that question guide their every act upon the world. Over the many years of their rule, they raised the gathering of spice into a vast and pitiless enterprise. Their harvesters went out across the dunes in great numbers, and their overseers drove the work hard, and the melange came flowing back in ever greater measure. Much of this wealth they did not spread outward nor use to soften their world, but folded inward into their own coffers and their own store of CHOAM shares. A share of the company, remember, is a portion of the endless profit of all trade, and the Harkonnens gathered these portions greedily, so that with each passing year their weight at the great table grew heavier, and their fortunes swelled towards something that few houses in all the Imperium could match. It is worth pausing here upon how the spice becomes shares, and how shares become a kind of quiet and lasting power. The melange gathered from the sand was sold and traded across the worlds, and the profit of that trade flowed in part into the coffers of the house that held the fief. With that profit, the Harkonnens could purchase yet more shares of the CHOAM, and with more shares, they drew a greater portion of all the company's gains, not only from spice, but from every kind of trade beneath the many suns. So the wealth of the desert did not merely sit as coin in a vault. It transformed itself into a deep and spreading claim upon the riches of the entire Imperium, growing quietly upon itself year after year. Yet all of this was built upon a hardness that ran through everything the Harkonnens did. They cared nothing for the world of Arrakis as a living place. The desert to them was a mine and nothing more, and the storms and the worms were merely obstacles to be counted against the profit. They cared nothing, too, for the people who worked the sands under their rule, driving the labor hard and giving little back, so that the wealth rose upward into the house while hardship remained below. There is a coldness in ruling a world only as a source of coin, and that coldness marked the long years of Harkonnen rule upon Dune like a chill that never quite lifted from the air. And beneath all this taking, the deep desert kept its own counsel. Far out beyond the reach of the harvesters lived the people of the sand, the Fremen, who moved through the driest places where no overseer cared to follow. The Harkonnens saw them, when they saw them at all, as little more than a nuisance upon the edges of the map, a scattering of desert folk hardly worth the counting. They did not understand, in their endless hunger for the immediate profit, that these quiet people knew the world in a way no lord ever had, and that beneath the visible ledger of spice there ran a hidden strength the Harkonnens never bothered to measure. Their greed made them blind to everything that could not be quickly counted. Think of the strange shape of a fortune built this way, for it is a shape worth resting upon. The Harkonnen wealth was vast, truly vast, rising higher with every harvest and every purchase of shares. Yet it was a wealth without warmth, gathered without care, hoarded without any purpose beyond the gathering itself. They grew rich as few houses had ever grown rich, and yet their riches bound them ever more tightly to the one dangerous world that made them, and to the endless labor of squeezing more and more from sands that owed them nothing. The greater their fortune grew, the more it depended upon their grip never loosening, upon the spice never failing, upon the desert remaining a thing to be endlessly taken. Consider, too, how a fortune of this kind slowly shapes the ones who hold it, molding the spirit as surely as it fills the coffers. A house that lives only to take comes in time to see all things as things to be taken, and every question, however large or small, narrows down to the single measure of gain. The Harkonnens grew ever more skilled at the counting and ever more blind to everything the counting could not hold, so that their great wealth, instead of freeing them, bound them tighter to the endless work of gathering more. There is a kind of poverty hidden inside such riches, a hunger that grows rather than eases with each new measure taken. And the cold house upon Dune fed that hunger for year upon year, without ever once being filled. And all the while the desert kept its slow patience, giving up its spice season after season, seeming to promise that it would give forever. This steady giving lulled the Harkonnens into a deeper certainty, for a thing that has flowed without fail for so long comes to feel like a law of the world rather than a fragile gift. They built their whole fortune upon the quiet assumption that the sand would always yield, that the harvest would always come, that their grip upon the fief would never truly be challenged. Yet a fortune that rests upon the assumption that nothing will ever change is a fortune balanced upon a single narrow point, and such balance, however long it holds, is never as secure as it appears to those who profit from it. For a long while the arrangement held, and the wealth flowed, and the Harkonnens counted their shares and thought their grip upon Dune eternal. Their name became bound in the minds of many to the very trade of spice, so that to think of Arrakis was to think of the cold house that squeezed it. They stood high at the great table of the CHOAM, weighted with shares, heavy with profit, seemingly secure upon the richest prize in the Imperium. And in that seeming security lay the quiet seed of everything that would later come. For a house that holds the greatest prize by grasping alone has built its whole strength upon a thing that can be lost. We need not follow that later turning tonight, for it belongs to another part of the tale. And the hour is for stillness rather than for change. It is enough, as the world softens around you, to hold in your mind this long season of Harkonnen wealth, the sand worked without rest, the melange flowing outward, the shares gathering inward, the fortune swelling year upon year until it rivaled the wealth of crowns. It is a picture of what the spice can do to those who hold it only to take, a fortune vast and cold, built high upon a single burning world. Let that picture rest quietly now, without judgment and without tension, the way one might watch a distant fire burning far out across the dunes at night. The Harkonnens took and grew rich beyond most reckoning, and for a long time the desert gave and gave. There is a slow and heavy weight in such a story, the weight of endless gathering, and you may let that weight settle you deeper into the softness beneath you. Breathe slowly, and let the count of shares and the flow of spice grow dim and far away. And let the long, cold rain of the grasping house fade gently into the quiet as you drift down toward sleep. Then, after all those long, cold years of Harkonnen holding, the Emperor took the fief of Arrakis away from that grasping house and gave it instead to House Atreides, to the noble Duke Leto. To the eye, this was a gift of great honor and great wealth, the richest prize in all the Imperium laid openly before a rising house, a mark of the highest imperial favor for all the worlds to see. Yet beneath the shining surface of the gift there lay a quiet trap, for the Duke had grown too well loved among the great houses, and the throne wished him drawn out onto open sand where he might more easily be destroyed. Let us rest for a while upon the two faces of this gift, for it wears one face in the light and quite another in the shadow. In the light, it is everything a house could dream of. The fief of Dune means the spice, and the spice means wealth beyond counting, and wealth beyond counting means a great and growing weight of CHOAM shares, a heavier seat at the great table, a fortune to lift House Atreides higher than it had ever stood before. To be granted such a prize by the hand of the Emperor himself is to be marked as a house of the first rank, favored and honored above nearly all the others. On its shining surface, the gift is a triumph, and House Atreides was, by its nature, a house that seemed to deserve such honor. Where the Harkonnens had been cold and grasping, the Atreides were known for a warmer kind of strength. Duke Leto led not by fear alone, but by a loyalty freely given, gathering to himself men and women who served him because they believed in him. And this drew to his house a deep and genuine affection across the worlds. He was seen as just, as honorable, as a lord who kept faith with those beneath him. And this good name spread quietly through the Landsraad until the Atreides stood high in the regard of the other great houses. To be loved among one's peers is a rare and precious thing, and Leto had earned it. Yet here, in that very love, lay the hidden edge of the gift. And this is the sorrowful heart of the matter. For the throne watches the great houses always, weighing their strength and their standing, and a house that grows too well loved becomes, in the cold arithmetic of power, a kind of danger. The emperor sat at the head of the great table, the greatest single holder of shares, and his power rested in part upon the great houses never uniting against him. A duke admired throughout the Landsraad, a man others might rally around, was precisely the sort of figure the throne had reason to fear. Leto's virtue, which drew the houses toward him, drew the throne's wary gaze as well. So the gift of Arrakis, so bright upon its surface, was fashioned in the shadow as a means of undoing. Upon the safe and settled world where the Atreides had long dwelt, surrounded by their own people and their own defenses, the house was difficult to strike. But out upon Arrakis, that cruel and burning world at the far edge of comfort, the Atreides would stand exposed. They would be drawn away from their strength and set down upon open sand, in a place they did not know, amid a world shaped for generations by the very enemies they were replacing. To move a house to Dune was to lift it into wealth and, at the same time, to lead it out into the open where a blow might fall. Consider how carefully such a trap is dressed in honor, for that is the cruel cleverness of it. The emperor did not send the Atreides into exile or disgrace. He raised them, publicly and grandly, bestowing upon them the most coveted prize in the Imperium, so that all the world saw only favor and reward. The trap wore the face of a blessing, so complete that to refuse it would have seemed like madness, an insult to the throne, and a turning away from the greatest fortune a house could hope to gain. And so the Atreides accepted, as almost any house would have accepted, stepping forward into the light of the gift with the blade folded quietly inside it, unseen. There is a deep sadness in watching a noble house walk into such a snare with open eyes and open hearts, and it is worth holding gently. For the Atreides were not fools. Duke Leto understood, at least in part, that the gift carried danger within it, that to take Arrakis was to leave behind the safety of the known and to stand upon exposed ground. Yet the pull of the prize, the weight of imperial honor, the promise of the spice, and all the standing it could bring, drew the house onward despite the shadow. Sometimes the wise walk knowingly into peril because to turn away would cost too much, and there is a quiet courage in that, mingled with sorrow. There is something worth resting upon in the very manner of the exchange, in how smoothly the throne could move so great a prize from one house to another. This is the quiet power that runs beneath the whole of the Imperium, the power to grant and to withdraw, to lift one house and set down another, all through the giving and taking of a fief. No army needed to march for this, and no open word of enmity needed to be spoken. The emperor had only to bestow a gift, grandly and publicly, and by that single act he could reshape the balance of the great table, unsettle a cold house grown too comfortable, and lead a warm house out onto dangerous ground. Such is the strength of the one who sits at the head of the CHOAM, that he can wound with a blessing and in danger with an honor. And it is worth holding, too, how the Atreides carried themselves into this shadowed gift, for their manner tells us much about the house itself. They did not grasp at the prize with the cold hunger of those who had held it before. They took it as a duty as much as a fortune, understanding that to rule is to serve as well as to gain, and carrying with them the loyalty of those who followed the Duke by their own free choice. Even as they stepped toward the hidden danger, they brought with them the warmth that had made them so widely loved, and there is a quiet nobility in that. A house going forward into peril without shedding the very goodness that had made it a target in the first place. And so the great pieces of the story shifted upon the board. The cold house that had squeezed the sand for so long was drawn back, and the warm house that was so widely loved was sent forward to take its place. And the throne watched both with careful and hidden purpose. The spice would still flow, and the shares would still gather, but now they would gather toward a house that stood alone upon a dangerous world, admired from afar and endangered up close. The gift changed hands, and with it changed the whole balance of watchfulness and fear around the great table, though few could yet see how deeply. We need not follow tonight what came of all this, for the turning of it belongs to a later and darker part of the tale, and this quiet hour is for stillness rather than for sorrow. It is enough to hold in your softening mind the shape of the gift itself, so bright upon its surface and so shadowed underneath, the richest prize in the Imperium laid before a noble and beloved house. Honor and danger folded together into a single offered hand. There is a strange and gentle ache in such a picture, the beauty of the gift and the sorrow hidden within it resting quietly side by side. Let that ache soften now into calm as the world grows dim around you. Great gifts and great dangers, we have seen again, are often the very same thing wearing different faces, and the brightest honor may carry the deepest shadow within it. There is no tension you need hold on to here, only the slow understanding that the wheel of power turns in this way, offering with one hand and testing with the other. Breathe slowly, and let the image of the noble house and its shining, shadowed gift rest lightly upon you. The sand of Arrakis, waiting far away under the hard, bright sun, as you drift gently down toward the deep quiet of sleep. If we pause now and ask a simple question, who truly profits from the trade of Dune? The answer spreads wide across the whole of the great table of the CHOAM. The Emperor profits, and the great houses profit, and the guild profits, and the house that holds the fief profits most visibly of all. The spice is dug from the sand by laboring hands and carried away at deadly risk, and yet the greatest share of its wealth flows upward, away from the desert, into the fortunes of those who never once touched the burning ground from which it comes. Let us trace that upward flow gently, for it is a quiet marvel to follow, the way a stream might be followed from its distant source toward the wide sea. It begins far out upon the open sand, where the melange lies exposed beneath the hard, white sun. There the harvesting crews labor amid the storms and the ever-present dread of the great worms, gathering the spice at the very edge of danger, giving their sweat and sometimes their lives to lift the treasure from the desert. This is where the wealth is truly made, out among those who bear the heat and the fear, and yet this is the one place along the whole stream where almost none of the wealth remains. From those laboring hands the spice is carried inward and upward, and at each step along the way it passes into the keeping of powers that risked nothing upon the sand. First, it enriches the house that holds the fief, the Lord of Arrakis, whose coffers swell with every measure gathered and sold. This is the most visible profit of all, the fortune of the ruling house rising plainly for all the worlds to see, so that when people think of who grows rich upon Dune, it is the name of the holding house that first comes to mind. Yet the holder of the fief, visible though the prophet is only one drinker at a very crowded stream. For the emperor profits as well, and profits greatly, though his gain is quieter and set further back from the sand. The throne holds the largest single portion of the shares of the CHOAM, and so a part of the profit of the spice trade, along with a part of the profit of nearly all trade beneath the many suns, flows steadily into the imperial treasury. The emperor need never send a single harvester onto the dunes, and yet, with every cargo of melange that crosses the dark, his fortune grows. His crown and his coffers are fed by the desert from afar, and the sand labors, in a sense, for a master it will never see. The great houses profit too, gathered together in the council of the Landsraad, for they hold among them a vast weight of CHOAM shares, taken altogether even larger than the emperor's own. Each house draws its portion of the company's endless gain, and so the wealth of Dune reaches outward into countless palaces, upon countless worlds, into houses that have never set foot upon Arrakis and never will. A lord upon some green and gentle planet, far from any desert, may grow richer with each passing season, simply because he holds his shares, and because somewhere out upon the burning sand the spice is being gathered by hands he will never know. And the guild profits as well, in its own soft and patient way, for nothing moves between the worlds without its silent leave. The great ships that carry the spice across the folded dark belong to the guild, and the guild takes its portion for the carrying, and it too holds shares within the combine. So even the movement of the wealth becomes a source of wealth, and the guild sits quietly at the great table, drawing its steady gain from the very flow of trade, asking little that can be seen, and yet leaving nothing that can move without its hand upon it. The stream feeds even those who merely carry it along. Consider now the strange shape of the whole arrangement, and let its strangeness settle softly over you. The wealth begins with the many, out upon the sand, and flows toward the few, up into the high seats of power. Those who bear the danger keep the least, and those who bear no danger at all keep the most. The desert gives its treasure, the laborers lift it at great risk, and then the melange rises past them all, past the crews and past the world itself, up into the fortunes of the mighty who gather at the great table and share the endless profit among themselves. It is an old shape, this upward flow, and it lies quietly at the heart of the whole Imperium. There is no anger needed in the seeing of this, only a calm and clear understanding, the kind of understanding that comes softly in the quiet hours. The trade of Dune enriches a great many powers at once, the throne and the houses and the guild and the holder of the fief, and the profit spreads wide across the settled stars. Yet the true origin of all that wealth is narrow and singular, a single burning world and the weary hands that work it, and the distance between where the wealth is made and where the wealth comes to rest is very great indeed. The whole grand machine turns upon this quiet fact, seldom spoken of and rarely seen. It is worth pausing, too, upon how invisible this whole flow remains to nearly everyone who benefits from it. A great lord upon a distant world, sitting in comfort among his gardens, may never once picture the burning sand, or the laboring crews, or the great worms moving beneath the dunes. To him, the profit arrives as a pleasant number in a ledger, a quiet increase in his standing, a portion of the endless gain of the combine. The desert and its dangers are hidden behind the smooth working of the CHOAM, so that the wealth seems almost to appear from nowhere, clean and effortless, its bloody and difficult origin softened into a simple line of counting. This is part of what makes the arrangement so enduring. that those who profit most need never look upon the place where the profit is made. And there is a further quiet turn in this, for the very smoothness of the flow depends upon the fragile source never failing. All these many powers, drinking so comfortably from the distant stream, have bound their fortunes together upon a single point they scarcely think about. The lord in his gardens, the guild among its ships, the houses in their palaces, the throne upon its seat, all of them lean upon the same far desert, though few of them feel the weight of that leaning. Their comfort and their certainty rest upon the labor of hands they will never see, upon a world that could, if it ever ceased to give, unmake every fortune at the great table at once. The invisibility of the source is also the hidden frailty of the whole. This is perhaps the deepest truth about the CHOAM and the spice, that its riches are gathered by the few who labor and enjoyed by the few who rule, and that the vast crowd of the mighty at the great table all drink from a single distant stream. When we ask, who profits? The honest answer is that nearly every power of the Imperium profits, each in proportion to the shares it holds, and that the one place along the whole flow where the wealth does not gather is the very place where the wealth is born. The sand gives, and the mighty receive, and the coin of the worlds rises quietly away from the desert that makes it. Let this understanding rest lightly upon you now, without weight and without tension, as the world grows soft and dim around you. There is a strange peace in seeing the shape of things plainly, in following the stream from the burning sand up into the high still fortunes of the powerful, and in knowing at last who truly profits from the trade of Dune. You need carry none of it forward into your rest. Breathe slowly, and let the great table and its many drinkers fade gently into the quiet. Let the upward flow of the spice grow dim and far away, and let the calm knowledge of it all carry you softly down into the deep and welcome stillness of sleep. Around the great table of the CHOAM there rests a balance, and it is worth pausing tonight to feel the shape of it, slowly and without hurry. It is not a balance held together by friendship, and it is not a balance held together by trust, for those are soft and shifting things that cannot bear the weight of so much wealth. It is instead a balance held together by fear, a quiet and constant and almost gentle fear. And once you understand this, you understand nearly everything about how the wealth of the worlds is kept from spilling into ruin. Let your breathing slow as you consider it, for there is something oddly restful in a machine so vast that turns upon nothing more than the careful watchfulness of those who share it. Imagine, if you will, that long table stretching away into shadow, and seated along its length the great powers of the Imperium. There sits the Padishah Emperor, holder of the greatest single portion of the shares. There sit the great houses of the Landsraad, each with its own measure, its own pride, its own long memory. There sits the Spacing Guild, silent and patient, its representatives saying little and watching everything. Each of these powers knows a simple truth, and it is this truth that keeps them still. Each of them knows that the others are watching the flow of the spice exactly as closely as they themselves are watching it. There is not a single cargo of melange lifted from the sands of Arrakis that goes unnoticed, not a single shift in the shares that passes without 100 quiet eyes turning toward it. This constant watching is the first thread of the balance. Because every power watches every other power, no power can move in secret for very long. A house that began to gather too many shares, that began to swell beyond its proper portion, would find itself seen at once, and being seen, it would find itself feared, and being feared, it would find itself opposed. The others would draw together against it, not out of malice, but out of simple self-preservation. For they would understand that a power grown too large is a power that might one day swallow them all. And so the very greed that might drive a house to reach for more is checked by the certain knowledge that reaching too far would summon every rival at once. There is a second thread woven through the first, and it is the knowledge of what the others could do if they chose. Consider the great houses of the Landsraad, taken all together. No single one of them can match the throne, and each knows this well. Yet gathered as one body, the houses hold a portion of the CHOAM even larger than the Emperor's own. And the Emperor knows this even better than they do. This knowledge sits always at the edge of his thoughts, a soft and unsleeping caution, for he understands that if ever the houses truly united against him, their combined weight could outvote even the crown. And so the Emperor, for all his Sardaukar and all his shares, must move carefully, must never press any house so hard that the others begin to whisper together, must never let the fear he inspires curdle into the greater fear that would bind his rivals into one. The houses, in their turn, feel the weight of the throne. Each of them knows that the Emperor commands the Sardaukar, those terrible soldiers raised upon a cruel world, and each knows that the throne could, if provoked beyond patience, turn that force upon any single house that stood alone. And so no house dares to reach too openly for power, lest it draw the eye of the crown and find itself isolated, its neighbors quietly grateful that the blow fell elsewhere. In this way, the throne fears the houses gathered, and the houses fear the throne alone, and each fear holds the other in place, and the balance endures. And through it all moves the guild, softest of all the powers, and in some ways the most feared, for the guild holds the one thing that none of the others can do without. Only the guild can fold space and carry ships between the stars. And so every cargo of spice, every soldier, every message, every fortune must pass at last through the guild's patient hands. The guild asks for little that can be seen. It does not crave the throne, and it does not gather armies, and it does not press for more shares than it needs. Yet all the other powers understand that nothing moves between the worlds without the guild's silent leave, and this understanding wraps the guild in a quiet dread all its own. To offend the guild would be to risk being cut off from the stars, to be left stranded upon a single world while trade flowed on without you, and so even the Emperor treads gently where the guild is concerned. You may see now how the whole vast machine turns. Each power is strong, and each power is watched, and each power knows that to seize too much would be to turn every other hand against it at once. So the shares are guarded jealously, and the seats at the table are counted and counted again, and every shift is measured against every other shift. The greed of each is balanced by the greed of all, and the strength of each is balanced by the combined strength of the rest. And out of this endless, careful weighing comes something that looks almost like peace. It is not peace born of goodwill. It is peace born of the certain knowledge that no single hand should ever be allowed to grasp the whole. There is a strange comfort in this, when you consider it slowly in the quiet of the night. So much wealth, so much power, so many proud and grasping and ambitious minds, and yet the whole of it held in a kind of stillness, each part restrained by the watchfulness of the others. It is like a great weight balanced upon a single point, trembling perhaps, but not falling, held in place by forces that pull in every direction at once, and so cancel one another into calm. The ledgers are vast, and the fortunes are beyond counting, and yet none of it moves in wild lurches, for every lurch would be seen and answered before it could grow. And yet you must remember, as you drift, that a balance held by fear is a fragile thing. It endures only so long as no power finds a way to escape the watching of the others. only so long as no single hand discovers something that the rest cannot answer. For all its careful weighing, the machine assumes that every power can be checked by the others, that every reach can be seen and opposed, that the strength of any one can be met by the strength of the rest. So long as that assumption holds, the balance holds with it, quiet and steady and enduring across the long years. But hidden within the balance is a question that no one at the table cares to ask aloud, and it is this: what would happen if a single power came to hold something that the others could not match, could not outvote, could not oppose with any weight of shares or soldiers or ships? What would happen if one hand found a threat so absolute that all the careful counting became meaningless, that all the watching came too late? The powers at the table do not ask this question because they cannot imagine an answer to it, and because to imagine it would be to feel the ground shift beneath the whole of their world. They prefer to believe that the balance is eternal, that fear will always be met by fear, that no one thread can ever be pulled without the rest pulling back. For now, though, let that question rest, unspoken and far away. For now the balance holds, the table is quiet, the shares are counted, and the great powers watch one another across the shadows with their steady, unsleeping care. The river of wealth flows on, guarded by dread, and the machine turns softly in the dark, and there is nothing in any of it that you need to hold or fear tonight. Let the weighing and the watching drift away from you, and let yourself sink a little deeper into the warm and quiet stillness as the great table fades slowly into shadow. Now we come to the moment when the careful balance around the table was broken, and though it is a tale of treachery and falling, we will move through it gently, the way one moves through a sad memory that has long since softened with time. For this is not a story to trouble your rest, but a story to carry you further into it. And even the fall of a great and noble house can be told in a voice low enough for sleep. You will remember that the emperor took the fief of Arrakis from the grasping Harkonnens and gave it instead to House Atreides, to the noble Duke Leto. To every eye this looked like a gift of the highest honor, the richest prize in all the Imperium laid before a rising house. The desert of spice and all its endless wealth placed into worthy hands. Yet beneath the gift lay a quiet trap, for the Duke had grown too well loved among the great houses of the Landsraad. His fairness, his honor, his gift for drawing loyal men to his side, all of these had made him a figure that the throne watched with growing unease. An emperor may forgive a rival his wealth and even his armies, but he finds it hard to forgive a rival his good name. And Leto Atreides had a very good name indeed. And so the gift of Arrakis was in truth a summons onto open ground. The Duke was drawn out from the safety of his ocean world of Caladan, that green and gentle place of water and mist, and set down upon the burning sands of Dune, far from his old strength and surrounded by the machinery of the spice. There, upon that exposed and unfamiliar world, he could be watched and pressed, and in time undone, and the throne could keep its own hands clean while another did the undoing. This was the shape of the trap, and the Duke, wise as he was, understood much of it even as he accepted the gift. For a lord may see the blade within the offering and still be bound by duty to take what his emperor bestows. When House Atreides came to Arrakis, the fragile balance we spoke of began to tremble, and then it was broken by treachery. The Harkonnens, who had held the fief for so long and hated to lose it, returned in the dark. They did not come alone, for their strength by itself would not have been enough against the Duke and his loyal men. They came with a secret aid that changed everything, the aid of the Emperor's own Sardaukar, those terrible soldiers of the throne, dressed in Harkonnen colors so that the hand of the crown would remain hidden. In this way, the throne and the old grasping house moved together against the Duke, the one lending its soldiers and the other lending its hatred, and between them they laid a snare that even honor and courage could not escape. The blow, when it fell in the night and from within, for no wall is strong enough to keep out a betrayer who is already inside the gate. A trusted man of the Duke's own household was turned, his loyalty bent by a grief and a longing that his enemies knew how to use. And through him the shields of the great house were lowered and its defenses opened to the dark. And so the house Atreides was brought down not in a fair battle upon the sand, but in a single terrible night of treachery, its guards overwhelmed, its strongholds taken, its people scattered into death and flight. The noble Duke Leto himself was captured and brought low, and the house that had shone so brightly among the great houses was, in the space of a few dark hours, all but extinguished. For a moment it seemed that everything would flow back into its old and familiar shape. The spice and the shares, so briefly held by the Atreides, would return to the hands that had held them for so long. The Harkonnens would resume their place upon the sands, gathering the melange as they always had, hoarding the wealth as they always had, and the great table of the CHOAM would settle once more into the arrangement it had known for years. The treachery, cruel as it was, seemed at first to serve the very balance it had broken, restoring the shares to old and comfortable channels and removing a figure whose growing name had troubled the throne. The Emperor could tell himself that order had been preserved, that a rival too well loved had been quietly removed, that the river of wealth would flow on undisturbed. And in the counting houses and upon the ledgers, this is indeed how it appeared. The shares turned. The fief changed hands once more. The name of Atreides, which had risen so high, seemed to sink beneath the sand and vanish, and the powers at the table drew a quiet breath and told themselves that the machine had corrected itself, that the trembling had passed, that the balance was whole again. To those who read only the ledgers, the story of House Atreides was finished, a brief, bright passage closed, a rival house folded neatly back into the shadows from which it had briefly emerged. Yet there is a difference between what the ledgers record and what truly comes to pass, and this is a difference worth carrying softly into your rest. The ledgers can count shares and cargoes and the turning of a fief, but they cannot see into the deep desert, and they cannot follow a single fleeing figure out beyond the reach of the great houses and their soldiers. The powers at the table saw a house destroyed and a balance restored, and they did not look closely enough at what had slipped away into the vast and burning night. For in the confusion of that terrible fall, not everything of House Atreides was lost. A thread remained, thin and almost invisible, carried out into the deep sands where no ledger reached and no counting house could follow. The Duke was gone, and his strength was scattered, and the shares had turned as the treacherous had planned. But the plans of the throne and the old grasping house had a flaw hidden within them, a flaw so small that none of the plotters thought to guard against it. They had counted the shares, and counted the soldiers, and counted the strongholds, and in all their careful counting, they had overlooked the one thing that could not be measured upon a ledger. They had overlooked what a single survivor might become, out there beyond their sight, upon the one world where the spice was made. And so the turning of the shares, which seemed at first so complete, was not the ending that the powers believed it to be. It was instead a beginning, though none at the table could have known it, hidden as it was beyond the edge of everything they thought to watch. The balance of fear had been broken by treachery and then seemed to mend itself, but a crack had opened that no ledger recorded, a small, quiet crack running out into the deep desert, and through that crack the whole of the great machine would one day be reached and turned. But that is a story that belongs to the sands and to the nights that follow, and it need not trouble you now. For the moment let the fall settle into the softness of memory. Let the treachery grow distant and dim. Let the ledgers close upon their neat and mistaken counting. The great powers believe the tale is finished, and they lie back in their certainty, unaware of the thread that has slipped beyond their reach. And you, drifting now in the warm dark, may let the same quiet settle over you, knowing that even the deepest fall may hide within it something that has not ended, something patient and waiting far out upon the sand, where the counting cannot go and the spice is born. Out beyond the reach of the ledgers, out where the great houses could not follow and the counting houses could not see, a single thread of House Atreides had slipped away into the deep desert. That thread was the Duke's son, the young Paul Atreides, and tonight we will follow him gently into the sands. For it is there, far from the great table and its careful counting, that the true secret of the spice began at last to reveal itself. Let your thoughts grow quiet and wide as the desert itself, and let us drift out with him into that vast and burning silence. The young Paul had escaped the terrible night of treachery, carried out into the deep desert along with his mother, away from the reach of the soldiers and the plotters who believed the house of his father destroyed. He was young still, and he had lost nearly everything: his father, his home, the wealth and the shares and the honor of his line. To the powers at the great table, he was nothing, a scattered remnant not worth the counting, a name already sinking beneath the sand. Yet, out there among the dunes, he was about to learn something that no lord at that table had ever truly understood, something that would in time make all their shares and all their soldiers into small and fragile things. For out in the deep desert lived the Fremen, the hardy and secret people of Dune, who had made the burning sands their home across long generations. To the great houses the Fremen were little more than a rumor, a scattering of desert folk of no importance, useful perhaps as laborers, but never counted among the powers of the world. Yet the Fremen knew Arrakis as no outsider ever had. They knew its hidden places and its deep ways. They knew how to live where others would die within a day. And above all, they knew the spice not as a distant cargo upon a ledger, but as the very substance of the world they walked upon. Among the Fremen, Paul Atreides began to learn the truth of the melange more deeply than any lord had ever learned it. For the great houses had always known the spice only from a certain distance. They knew its price, and they knew its uses, and they knew the wealth it brought into their coffers. They knew that it lengthened life, and that it opened the inner sight, and above all that it made possible the folding of space, so that without it, the ships would fall still, and every fortune would turn to dust. All of this they knew as one knows the figures written in a book, precise and useful, and yet somehow far away. But they did not know the spice as the Fremen knew it, woven into every breath and every meal and every ritual of a life lived upon the sand, present in the very air, coloring the eyes of the people a deep and total blue, binding them to the desert and the desert to them. Living among these people, drinking in their knowledge and their ways, Paul came to understand the spice from the inside as a living presence rather than a distant commodity. He learned where it came from and how it was born, out in the deep desert, in the great slow cycles of the sand. He came to understand its bond with the giant worms of Arrakis, those vast and ancient creatures that moved beneath the dunes, for the spice and the worms were joined together in a single deep mystery, the one arising from the long secret life of the other. No lord upon the ledgers had ever grasped this bond, for no lord had ever needed to. They had been content to let laboring hands dig the spice from the sand and carry it at deadly risk, while they gathered the profit far away, never asking where the melange truly came from or upon what fragile thread its endless flow depended. And it was in coming to understand this fragile thread that Paul learned the thing that changed everything. For he saw, as he sank deeper into the knowledge of the desert, that the spice was not merely wealth. He saw that it was the single thread upon which the whole of the Imperium hung. Every ship that folded space depended upon it. Every fortune at the great table rested upon it. The throne and its Sardaukar, the great houses and their pride, the guild and its silent power, all of them, without exception, depended in the end upon the steady flow of melange from this one dry world. Cut that flow, and the ships would fall still. Cut that flow, and the fortunes would crumble. Cut that flow, and the whole vast machine of trade, the whole balance of fear, the whole Imperium, would grind slowly and terribly to a halt. This was the secret that the great houses had never grasped. For all their counting and their watching, they had built their whole careful balance upon the assumption that the spice would always flow, that Arrakis would always yield its melange, that the river of wealth would run on forever. They watched the shares, and they watched one another, and they never once thought to ask what would happen if the spice itself should cease. It had simply never occurred to them that the coin of the worlds could ever stop being made, and so they had never guarded against it, never even imagined it, never let the thought trouble the smooth surface of their certainty. But Paul, out in the deep desert, learning the spice as the Fremen learned it, came to see exactly this. He came to understand that whoever could truly command Arrakis, not merely hold its fief from a distance, but command the deep desert itself and the worms and the sand where the spice was born, could command the fate of every house and every crown. For such a one would hold not merely wealth, but the source of all wealth. Not merely a share of the coin, but the power to decide whether the coin should exist at all. And this was a power of a wholly different kind from the power counted at the great table, a power that no measure of shares could match, a power that lay entirely outside the careful balance of fear. Consider how strange and how quiet this turning was. The great powers had fought their treachery and turned their shares and settled back into their certainty, believing the game concluded. And all the while, far out upon the sand where none of them thought to look, a young man they had dismissed as nothing was learning the one truth that could unmake them all. He gathered no armies that they could count, and he seized no shares that they could measure, and he made no move that appeared upon any ledger. He simply came to understand, more deeply than any of them, the fragile thread upon which their whole world hung. And understanding, in this case, was itself the beginning of a mastery greater than any they possessed. There is something restful in this, when you consider it in the deep quiet of the night. All the wealth and all the shares and all the soldiers of the Imperium, and yet the true turning came not from more of these things, but from a deeper seeing, from a young man out upon the sand who came to know the spice as it truly was. The great table had built its power upon counting, and Paul built his upon understanding. And understanding proved the stronger by far. The desert had taught him what no ledger could teach, and that teaching would in time reach all the way back to the great table and set it trembling. But let all of that remain out upon the sand for now, distant and unhurried. For the moment there is only the young Paul among the Fremen, learning the deep truth of the spice beneath the wide and quiet sky, and the vast desert stretching away in every direction, and the great slow worms moving far below. Let that wide stillness settle over you, the stillness of the deep desert at night, where the sand cools and the stars wheel slowly overhead. There is nothing to count here and nothing to guard. Only the quiet learning of a single truth, and you may let it carry you softly onward, deeper and deeper into rest. And so, out in the deep desert, having learned the true nature of the spice, Paul Atreides came at last to hold a single threat that no power at the great table could withstand. Tonight, we will draw close to that threat and turn it slowly in our thoughts. And though it is the most terrible word in all the history of the Imperium, we will hold it gently, the way one might hold a smooth, cold stone in the palm, feeling its weight without any fear. For even this, the ultimate threat, can be told in a voice low and soft enough to carry you down into sleep. You will remember the fragile truth that Paul had come to understand, that the spice was the single thread upon which the whole Imperium hung. Every folded ship, every fortune, every crown, all of it depended upon the steady flow of melange from the sands of Arrakis. And you will remember that the great powers had never once guarded against the failing of that flow. For it had simply never occurred to them that the coin of the worlds could ever cease to be made. It was upon this unguarded place, this single blind spot in all their careful counting, that Paul's whole power came at last to rest. For living among the Fremen and learning the deep secrets of the desert, Paul came to understand something that the great houses in all their distant counting had never grasped. He learned that the spice, so precious and so seemingly endless, was in truth fragile beyond imagining. He came to understand the deep and delicate cycle by which the melange was borne out in the sand, bound up with the great worms and the hidden waters of the desert, in a balance as tender as it was ancient. And understanding that cycle, he came to see that it could be broken. He came to see that the deep desert could be made to yield no spice at all, that the very source of the melange could be poisoned and stilled, and that this could be done by a hand that knew the desert deeply enough to reach into the heart of the mystery. Consider what this meant, slowly and without alarm, for it is a strange and quiet kind of terror, the terror of a thing that cannot be answered. To burn the spice forever, to still its making at the source, would not merely reduce a fortune or shift a share. It would freeze every ship in the Imperium where it stood. The Guild, that silent power that carried all trade between the stars, would find its folding of space made impossible, and the great ships would drift dead and useless in the dark. Every cargo would halt. Every message would cease. The worlds, so long bound together by the constant flow of trade, would fall apart into isolated islands, each cut off from all the others, each left alone beneath its own sky. And the whole vast machine of the CHOAM, the great combine that touched nearly everything bought and sold across the Imperium, would shatter in an instant. All the shares would become worthless, for a share of a trade that no longer flows is a share of nothing at all. All the careful counting, all the guarded seats at the table, all the balance of fear would collapse into meaninglessness. The emperor upon his throne, the great houses in their pride, the guild in its silence, all of them would find their power turned to dust. For all of their power had rested, in the end, upon the spice, and the spice would be gone. This is why the threat to burn the spice forever was a threat that no power at the table could withstand. Against a rival's shares, one could gather shares of one's own. Against a rival's soldiers, one could raise soldiers of one's own. Against any move that could be counted and measured, the great powers had always been able to answer with a countermove, and this was the whole basis of their long, careful balance. But against the threat to destroy the spice itself, there was no answer at all. There was no share that could outweigh it, no soldier that could stand against it, no fold of space that could escape it. It lay entirely outside the balance of fear, and so it broke that balance utterly, for it was a threat to which no counter existed. Think of how the great powers had built their whole world upon the assumption that every reach could be opposed, that every strength could be met by another strength, that no single hand could ever grasp what all the others together could not answer. This one threat undid that assumption completely. For here at last was a single hand holding something that all the shares of the emperor, and all the shares of the houses, and all the silent power of the guild could not match. Here was a word so absolute that the moment it was truly held, all the careful counting became meaningless, and all the watching came too late. The question that no one at the table had dared to ask aloud had finally been answered, and the answer stood out upon the sand in the person of a single young man. And notice, as you drift, how quietly this power differed from all the power that had come before it. The Harkonnens had grown rich by squeezing the desert for every measure of melange, hoarding wealth and shares until their fortune rivaled that of kings. Their power was the power of gathering, of taking more and more into their grasping hands. But Paul's power was of a wholly different kind. It did not come from gathering the spice, but from the willingness to end it. It did not come from holding more of the coin than anyone else, but from the ability to destroy the coin altogether. It was a power born not of greed, but of understanding. And it was, for that very reason, far greater than any fortune ever hoarded upon those sands. There is a deep stillness in this thought, if you let yourself sink into it. All the frantic gathering of the great houses across all the long years, all the treachery and the counting and the guarding of shares. And in the end, the true mastery of the whole came to rest upon a single quiet threat, held by one who had learned the desert deeply enough to speak it. The one who could destroy the coin of the worlds held more than any who merely hoarded it, for the power to unmake a thing is always greater than the power to possess it. And this terrible word, this threat to burn the spice forever, gave Paul mastery over them all, over the throne and the houses and the guild alike, without his ever needing to raise a fortune to rival theirs. Let that sink softly into the quiet of the night, and feel how it turns the whole long tale of wealth upon its head. The ledgers had counted and counted, and believed that counting was power. The houses had gathered and gathered, and believed that gathering was strength. And all the while the true power lay elsewhere, out upon the sand, in the hands of one who understood the fragile thread that held the whole together, and who was willing, if he must, to cut it. The great table had never imagined such a thing, and so it had never guarded against it, and so it lay open, at last, to a single word. But there is no need to feel the weight of that word tonight, for it need never be spoken to do its work. The mere holding of it was enough, the mere knowing that it could be done. And you, drifting now in the warm and gathering dark, may simply let the knowledge rest, as smooth and cool and harmless as a stone in the palm. The great powers do not yet fully understand what has come to hold them, and the desert keeps its patient silence, and the spice flows on, for now beneath the wide and quiet sky. Let all of it settle into stillness around you, and let yourself sink a little deeper still, carried gently by the knowledge that even the most terrible power can be held, at last, in perfect calm. And now, in this last quiet turn of our long tale, we come to the question that has waited beneath the whole of it, and we may ask it softly, as one asks a gentle riddle at the very edge of sleep. Who really holds the great combine now? Who truly commands the CHOAM, that hidden company that touches nearly everything bought and sold across the Imperium, that river of wealth flowing silent between the stars? We have traveled a long way together to reach this question, and now, at the last, the answer lies open before us, plain and strange and restful all at once. For a long time it seemed that the CHOAM was held by many hands at once, divided among the great powers seated around that shadowed table. The Padishah Emperor held the greatest single portion of the shares, and so it seemed that the throne commanded the Combine. The great houses of the Landsraad held together a portion even larger, and so it seemed that they too commanded it. The Guild held its silent seat and touched every fold of space, and so it seemed that nothing moved without its leave. Each of these powers believed itself a master of the whole, or at least a master of its own great portion, and the balance of fear held them all in place, each watching each restrained by all. But we have seen that beneath all of this counting lay a single fragile truth. The shares of the CHOAM, for all their vastness, would be only numbers upon a page, if not for one substance. The spice, the melange, made upon one world alone, was the true coin that gave every share its worth. And so the true holder of the Combine was never truly the one with the most shares, but the one who could command the spice itself. Whoever held Arrakis held the coin of the worlds, and whoever could destroy that coin held everything. For the power to unmake the source of all wealth stood above every fortune ever gathered. And so we come to the answer, quiet and clear. The one who truly holds the Combine now is the one who came to command the spice at its very source, out in the deep desert where the melange is born. It is Paul Atreides, called by the Fremen Muad'Dib, the young survivor whom the great powers had dismissed as nothing, the thread that slipped away beyond the reach of their ledgers. He took the mastery of the whole, not by gathering a greater fortune than the Emperor and the houses and the Guild, but by understanding, more deeply than any of them, the fragile thread upon which all their fortunes hung, and by holding the single threat that none of them could withstand. Consider how gently the true power had shifted, and how little of it appeared upon any ledger. The Emperor still sat upon his throne, and the houses still held their shares, and the Guild still folded space between the stars. To the eye, the great table looked much as it always had. The same powers seated in the same shadows, the same wealth flowing along the same channels, and yet the balance beneath it had turned completely. For the one who could burn the spice forever stood outside all the counting, holding a threat to which no share and no soldier and no fold of space could answer. The powers at the table could go on counting their portions, but their portions now rested, every one of them, upon the sufferance of a single hand out upon the sand. This is the truth hidden beneath the throne and the shares, the truth we have traveled so far and so slowly to reach. The one who holds Arrakis holds the coin of the worlds, and the one who can destroy that coin holds everything. Paul Atreides took that power not with a greater fortune, but with a greater understanding, standing upon the sand with the fate of all trade resting quietly in his hand. The great Combine, for all its vastness and all its careful balance, came in the end to answer to the one who commanded the desert where the spice was made. For without the spice, the Combine was nothing, and the spice was his to spare or to destroy. And so, when we ask who really holds the Combine now, we find that the answer is not written in any ledger, and cannot be. It is not the one with the most shares, and it is not the one upon the throne, and it is not even the silent guild that carries all trade between the stars. It is the one who understood, more deeply than all the rest, that the whole vast machine turned upon a single fragile thread, and who came to hold that thread in his own hand. The wealth of every world, the fortunes of every house, the power of the throne and the guild alike, all of it had come to rest, at the last, upon the deep desert and the one who commanded it. There is a soft and quiet wisdom in this, worth carrying with you into the deepening dark. All the long history we have followed, the birth of the Combine after the fall of the thinking machines, the dividing of the shares among the great powers, the treachery and the turning of fortunes, the rise and fall of grasping houses, All of it came in the end to a single truth. The true trade of the worlds was never really about who counted the most, but about who understood the deepest. The ledgers measured shares, but they could not measure understanding, and it was understanding, in the end, that held the whole. And now, you may let the ledgers close and the counting cease. There is nothing more to weigh tonight, no shares to guard, no seats to number, no balance to hold in careful trembling. The great table fades softly into shadow, and the river of wealth flows on quietly between the stars, and the desert lies wide and calm beneath its wheeling sky, and none of it asks anything of you at all. You have followed the whole long tale of the combine and the spice, from its hidden beginnings to the single hand that came to hold it, and you may set all of it down now, gently, like a heavy book laid aside at the end of a long and peaceful day. Let the worlds grow soft and distant around you. Let the great powers keep their quiet vigil far away, out among the stars where they can no longer reach you. Let the spice flow on through the dark without your watching, and let the fortunes rise and fall without your care. There is nothing here you must hold on to, and nothing you must remember, and nothing you must decide. The whole vast machine of trade turns softly on without you, as it always has and always will, and you are free at last to let it all drift beyond the edge of thought. Breathe slowly now, and feel how light you have become, released from all the counting and the weighing of the day. The desert cools beneath the stars, and the great worms move far below the sand, and the spice is born in silence out in the deep, and none of it disturbs the deep and gathering quiet that is settling over you now. Think, if you wish, of how far we have come, from the long silence after the fall of the thinking machines, through the birth of the great combine and the dividing of its shares, past the throne and the houses and the silent guild, out to the burning sands of Dune and the single hand that came to hold it all. And think how little of that vast history matters now, here in the warmth and the dark, where nothing is asked of you and nothing is owed. Let each breath carry you a little further down, past the ledgers and the shares, past the thrones and the great houses, past the very last faint whisper of the trade between the worlds, and into the wide, soft stillness that has been waiting for you all along, warm and dark and endlessly kind. There is no more counting to be done, and no more to hold, and no more to know, only this gentle sinking into quiet, deeper and softer, with every slow and easy breath, where you may rest now, fully and completely, at peace. And so the long journey through the hidden river of wealth comes gently to its close. You have drifted alongside the CHOAM, the great and quiet combine, whose name means an honest league for the advancement of trade. And you have seen how its seats and its shares are divided among the Padisha Emperor, the great houses of the Landsraad, and the silent Spacing Guild. You have learned that the true coin of the universe is not gold, but the spice, the melange gathered from one desert world alone, and that whoever holds Arrakis holds the flow of all fortune. You have seen how the Harkonnens grew rich upon the sand, how the gift of that world to House Atreides was a gift wrapped around a hidden blade, and how the young Paul Atreides came at last to hold the one threat that no power at the great table could withstand, the power to end the spice forever. There is nothing left now that you must remember, and nothing you must weigh or measure. You may let all of it go, softly, the way a ledger is closed at the end of a long and quiet day. Your body is heavy and warm. Your breathing is slow and even, and the whole great machine of trade turns on far away from you, asking nothing of you at all. Let the numbers fade, let the worlds grow dim, and let yourself sink the rest of the way down into deep and peaceful sleep. Good night. Rest well. And whenever you wish to drift once more through the quiet history of the spice and the company that lives upon it, this journey will be here, waiting to carry you softly back into sleep.